Welcome to Heroes Have Wings, the podcast that gives a voice to the unsung heroes of Army aviation. I'm your host, Jason Santiago. For the Army aviators, crew chiefs, and flight medics who put it all on the line in the heat of battle, this is their opportunity to share untold stories of courage, sacrifice, and unbreakable will. From their beginnings to the battlefield, you hear about their hardships, the moments of doubt, and how they overcame impossible odds to save lives. These warriors didn't just fight for survival, they put others above themselves, embodying the true spirit of heroism and selfless service. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Heroes Have Wings. Today, we sit down with Ervin Bier, a man who lived a life of resilience, sacrifice, and unwavering dedication. From growing up in Wisconsin and Oklahoma to serving in the elite 75th Ranger Regiment, Ervin's journey took him from the battlefield to the skies as a Blackhawk and Apache pilot with multiple combat deployments. But like every warrior, the fight didn't end when the mission was over. Through loss, adversity, and the weight of war, Ervin learned three powerful lessons. Tomorrow isn't promised, life is too short to carry negativity, and in the end, we leave the world with only two things, memories and regrets. So make damn sure that you have more memories than regrets. Now, a first officer for a commercial airliner, Ervin continues to mentor aspiring pilots and give back to the next generation. This story is about perseverance, purpose, and the bonds that last beyond the uniform. Ervin Bier, welcome to Heroes Have Wings.
Thanks, Jason. Good to see you.
What's up, Erv?
It's another day. We're starting Monday. Weekend's over. Time to get back to grinding a bit.
Yeah, how do you feel about Mondays?
Yeah, all I got's days on, days off. So any day I'm going back to work's a Monday, really.
No, I understand, man. Mondays is probably one of my toughest days. I don't know why. I struggle on Mondays. I don't know if it's because what the Army's done or it's just life, but I struggle on Mondays.
Yeah, I know that feeling.
Get started with these quick hits. Coffee or energy drinks?
Coffee.
City life or country living?
I like a little bit of a blend, man. I like hitting those restaurants and a little bit of the nightlife, but I don't like living around a whole bunch of people, so I like the country.
One thing I want to share with the audience is this man literally has his own plane in his backyard, so he goes wherever he wants. So it could be either or.
It is true.
At a moment's notice, which is impressive. Summer heat, winter cold?
Ooh, man, I love them both. I was just at the beach, and we had to walk out there in a jacket and jeans, bare feet, but it was great. But I do like the summertime, but actually getting that water too. So gotta love them both.
Movies or books?
Books.
Dog person, cat person?
Both.
Beach vacation, mountain retreat?
Beach vacation.
Wake up early, stay up late?
Wake up early.
Action movies or comedies?
Comedies now.
Camping or road trip?
Ooh, camping.
Texting or calling?
Calling. Gotta hear those voices.
I like it. So let's get it started, man. Where'd you grow up?
So I was born in Wisconsin, and after a few years, my parents moved down to Oklahoma for better job opportunities. So at 4.5, 5 years old, started elementary school in Muskogee, Oklahoma. After a year, moved over to Perry, Oklahoma, and then spent the rest of my time growing up in Perry, Oklahoma, just outside of Stillwater, Guthrie, about an hour north of Oklahoma City.
What was your family dynamic like?
So, had my mom, had my dad, had an older brother and a younger brother. Older brother was about 1.5 years older than me, and younger brother was about 4.5, 5 years younger than me. So, close family. My dad was a kind of controlling person, so he didn't allow us to really see a lot of extended family.
How was it? First question I want to ask, how was it moving from Wisconsin to Oklahoma? Was it a big change or
Yeah, it's a big change because up there, we had all the family all around us. Moving out to Oklahoma, it was just us.
How did that make you guys feel, your siblings and your mom?
There was some resent on my mom's side. Uh, Myself, it was just, it's just growing up. So I had my brother, so there was that. So not a big thing, not a, quite as big a deal because we didn't really grow up with our cousins at that point yet.
The relationship between your mom and dad, how was that?
They're divorced now. It kind of came to a head with his drinking and the controlling part. And I mean, it was pretty significant. Like he picked out her clothes, he picked out what she could do, when she could do stuff. Um, and when his drinking got to the point that my wife and I moved them in with us, and we're like, "Mom, if you want to go buy clothes, go buy clothes." And he's like, "Well, that's not the way we do things." And I'm like, "Well, I don't know what to tell you, Dad." He'd get up from the table and he'd leave his plates and dishes for Mom, and I'm like, "Dad, you can pick up your own plate." I pick up my plate, and he got all mad one day, and he's like, "Oh, you want me to do the damn dishes too?" I'm like, "Nobody said anything about doing dishes. Just pick up your plate."
Why do you think your dad was like that?
I don't know. I really wish I did. It helped me understand him more, but he lives with my brother now. There's a he's one of those type of people that he has to be the center of attention. He has to be that bright spot in the room, and you could tell that with where we lived in Oklahoma. There was very few veterans. He loves living with my brother because my brother never joined the military, so he's got that to kind of hold over his head.
Your dad was in the military?
My dad was in the military. He was a Vietnam veteran. He served in Vietnam, multiple tours. A lot of great stuff out there that he accomplished, but he always felt that he had to one up all these other people.
I think we may have found the issue right there then.
Yeah,
Multiple combat deployments. He's probably never dealt with the things that he's seen in combat, and yeah, it's probably his way of dealing with things. Watching your dad be that way, how did that help you become the man you are today? And what lessons did you learn, good or bad?
joining the military was probably one of the best things that ever happened to me because I could see myself becoming that person because we all try to emulate our parents, those influential people in our lives. And then not only joining the military, but going straight into special operations, going straight into the 75th Ranger Regiment, where we were taught what happens in bat stays in bat. We don't talk about stuff outside of battalion. You don't talk about stuff outside of the company. And we didn't, so there was no bragging. You couldn't go out to the club and be like, "Hey, we just did stuff." So that really changed the mindset that I had grown up with, which was, hey, you brag about yourself. You tell everybody what you've done, how you've did things. So, it's a conversation that a really good friend of mine, a good friend of both of ours, Gary Simmons, and I have had multiple times, just talking about those experiences when he was in task force and I was at regiment. You just didn't talk about those things. You didn't talk about yourself.
Yeah, if there's one thing I've noticed with veterans, they struggle to talk about themselves. And I get it. It took me some time. I don't even like to talk about myself, but when you go in front of an interview or you meet new people, you kind of have to do that, right?
You got to sell yourself. That's one of the things I do when I mentor people, and they're not just military guys, but civilian guys. I'm like, you got to sell yourself. You get that one opportunity in front of that recruiter, so you've got to sell yourself. Got to be honest. I said you got to be honest, but you got to sell yourself. You got to check that humility just a little bit.
No, I agree with you. And you said something very important. That one interview, that one conversation with one person could change your life forever, good or bad. So you have to make sure that you make sure you put out the right information at the right time. And sometimes you have to talk about yourself. It's just the way of the world. What did your dad do in the Army?
He was an infantry guy.
He was?
Yep.
Did he retire?
Nope, he did, I want to say 4.5 years, a couple tours in Vietnam, and then got out.
Now, you said earlier your brother, he never joined the military. Was there a reason, or he just never was interested?
I think it was a combination of getting in trouble when he was younger, and then that the military was just not his thing. He wasn't a follow when need to follow, lead when need to lead type person. He's in the oil and gas industry, so he'll go out, work a job with a couple guys, and then move on to the next job.
Now, your relationship with your mom, what's that like?
It's good. Sometimes it's a bit of a struggle because they still want to see themselves as the parent sometimes, and then at other times you have to look at your aging parent and try to help them make decisions, better decisions for themselves.
Yeah, I agree with you, man. That's something I deal with myself right now. Now that we're getting older, and I think about it quite a bit. When I become that parent that's so old, I never want to become that parent that it's not that I can't take care of myself. It's hard for a person like me to really depend on somebody. And it's something I've learned. It's challenging, man, especially as our parents get older. Because even with my mom, I try to give her advice. She doesn't want to listen, and I get it. She's my mom, right? But it's a struggle every day. And I think about, man, I'm going to be that parent. I hope I don't be that parent one day. And I don't mean it in a bad way, because I'm noticing when people get older, they're just set in their ways and they just do things a certain way. And it's nothing against them. That's how they do things, right?
Yeah.
Watching your parents as you grew up, staying together, and the dynamic of the relationship, how did that help you become the husband you are today?
My wife and I have had a lot of conversations about that. Watching my dad make all the decisions, no discussion. It was his way. I've looked at that and I realized that a marriage is supposed to be a partnership. And because it's a partnership, it can't be a dictatorship. It just by nature can't be. So my wife and I, Joey and I, we try to discuss so much stuff. Sometimes we over discuss things where she'll be like, look, I don't care, just do that. Or I'll tell her the same thing. But there's a respect there where even if I know she doesn't care what I do with something or how I do something, she'll sit there and at least know that I'm respectful enough to ask her opinion. You know, and a perfect example was last night. The winds were calm coming into land back at the house. And she's like, I don't really want to land with the sun in my eyes. And I'm like, okay, well, we'll circle around and land the opposite direction then. And it's just little things like that that I can honestly say I don't see in my mom and dad's relationship. Growing up, there was never, well, what do you think? Or there was never a discussion.
The relationship with your brother, what was that like?
So my older brother, he passed away about 10 years ago. That was pretty good. My older brother and I got along really good. My little brother and I, it was a bit contentious because he'd gotten in trouble with the law for a while. And because of security clearance issues, because when I left the military, I went to customs and I was actually a law enforcement officer for a while. I had to step back a little bit and kind of keep him at arm's length until he kind of got his life figured out. And, once he got his life figured out, he took off. He's got his path now. He's got his feet set and he's moving forward. He's married. He's had a couple kids and he's realized that getting something of value takes effort and time. Something that doesn't take any effort, doesn't take any time, there's no value in it. It's that easy road that just doesn't get you anything.
Yeah, I agree with you. I agree with you 100% on that. And that philosophy could be carried out throughout life with so many things: career, relationships, fitness, health, financial. I tell a lot of people that I mentor, there's no such thing as a shortcut.
There isn't.
And in fact, if you do a shortcut, most of the time you have to go back and redo the work. So it's not a shortcut, it's just double work. So do things. One thing I instill in my children, do things the right way the first time. Leave your mark of quality on it, take pride in the things you do, and move forward with that.
Yeah, I mean, you can't sit there and say those aren't good words. I can't think of anything truer said than that. I think it's one of the reasons why the college graduation rate has dropped so much in the last 20 years. Everybody sends their kids to college, and kids aren't earning that. So college is not a, hey, I need to go to school and learn. It's, hey, you know what? What's the party school? Where can I go and have the most fun?
Yeah, I believe in college education, but I have my opinions on it. And it's what you said. I think college nowadays is a business. It's a money-making machine. And what you just said really hit the head. I don't even think it's a vessel of learning that much. I think it's more of an experience, a place where you get an experience. Now, do you learn? It's up to that person how much work they want to put in, right? But it's all about the experience and how you get that same experience, but you get paid and go through a little bit of life joining the army or the military, right?
Absolutely. I think once colleges figured out that parents would mortgage away their futures and everything else, I think colleges figured out, hey, you know what, this $100,000 piece of paper, we could print these things. It's like the government printing money. They just print these things and hand them out.
Who are some of the biggest influences in your childhood?
You know, it sounds cliche and cheesy to say this, but you know, Superman was actually a big influence in my life. And the reason behind that is, you know, he's out there helping people and there's no gain for him. Zero gain. He's out there just helping people because that's the right thing to do. So, like I said, as cheesy as that sounds and cliche, that was a big influence in my life growing up. I'm like, I want to help people. I want to do what I can to help people's lives get better. And joining the military was kind of that big picture. Hey, the military had helped people. The military helped people through all the different wars, conflicts, peacekeeping operations, and so forth. And I want to be a part of that legacy. And even after I retired from the military, I still wanted to go out there and slay those dragons, which is why I went to customs for a few years. And then at that point, I kind of figured out, hey, you know what? I need to take care of family and myself, because at the end of the day, you know, the Army kind of treats you like a magazine, like an M4 magazine. It's sports. They're going to slap, pull, observe, release, tap, and squeeze. And when you can't bang anymore, you know, they're going to eject that magazine, move on to the next one. And you know what I'm talking about. You're smiling because you know.
Oh, hey. I was going to say, if there's one thing a soldier knows is how replaceable we are. But it's the nature of the beast. It doesn't even bother me. Well, actually, in the military, it didn't even bother me either. We just all knew that when our time came, it came. If we had to go, we had to go. It did bother us behind this. I think a lot of us dealt with it behind the scenes, but we all understood what we're getting ourselves into. And I think a lot of us just said, all right, it is what it is. We'll keep it pushing.
You know, I honestly, it didn't really bother me until I was getting out of the military. And what I had two events that kind of yin and yanged it, that made me realize a couple things. And it really brought a disappointment in the Army. And that was at Fort Rucker. They held four retirement ceremonies a year. It was a big mass retirement ceremony. And the most senior person there was an 05. You might occasionally see an 06. But we had 3 general officers at Fort Rucker, and none of the 3 showed up to those retirement ceremonies. And then I attended a Navy basic training graduation. Hands down, the most amazing ceremony I'd ever watched in the military. And, you know, my basic training, my NCO graduation, warrant officer graduation, I watched my wife's OCS graduation, I watched other retirement ceremonies, and I was talking to a chief petty officer, and I was like, "Hey, man, you guys put on an amazing show." And he looked at me, and he was surprised. He's like, "Why wouldn't we?" He's like, "This is their first ceremony in the Navy." He's like, "We got admirals fighting to be the guest speaker." And then I went back to that Fort Rucker retirement ceremony. I was just that kind of hurt. Knowing I was going to be replaceable, I knew that was the nature of the beast. But the lack of caring from the leadership, that's what kind of hurt.
Yeah, I think I think that we're going to get to that. I think that's something we encountered through our whole entire military career, right? So it's something that by the time you retired, your mind and your ass is pretty much callous to it, man. It's just, you're just like, yeah, I guess it is what it is, man. Another wonderful whatever it is. At what point in your young life did you realize you're going to join the Army?
I realized I was going to join the Army, or at least some form of the military, probably early high school, only because there was not a lot of opportunity to go to college. There was, I shouldn't say there was an opportunity. There was an opportunity to go to college, but the scholarships I was watching other kids get, I didn't have those opportunities for various reasons. So I told myself, hey, you know what? If I want to go to college someday, the Army is a great route. They have the vehicle, the GI Bill to get into. And honestly, at the time, I was looking for adventure, not necessarily continuing that education.
When you say adventure, what type of adventure were you looking for? Just fun?
Yep. So I grew up in a town of 5,000 people. So yeah, it's a small town. So adventure was an open book. It's like, what's over the next hill? What's the next challenge? What's the next wherever I'm going to put my head?
So when you decided to join the Army, was it always the Army or was it just the military?
It was the military, and then my dad influenced me to go to the military or go to the Army. And that was, he didn't want to see his son in any other branch.
What was that conversation like with your parents when you finally made that decision?
So my mom was absolutely against it. And I think she was against it because that was all my dad would talk about, his 3 or 4 years. That was the only thing that mattered to him, was 3 or 4 years, his Vietnam service. So she didn't want me to have anything to do with that. And then my dad, when I was looking at exploring different options, he's like, "Oh, the Army." He's like, son of mine is going to be in any other branch. He's like, "You're not going to be in the Air Force and not do anything. You're not going to be in the Navy just sitting on a boat." He's like, "Real men go to the Army." So I was like, "All right, I guess it's the Army then."
It's crazy. Now that we're parents, I was talking about this last night. Now that we're parents and I have my older children and now I have my baby girl now, right? I realize how much of an influence we have on our kids' life by the people we surround them, the things we expose them, the way we conduct ourselves, the things we say out loud. It's crazy how much of an influence that we have on our children, but we're supposed to, because we're their parents, right? Primary educators. We're the ones, raising them and teaching them the way of life. And I try to be an open-minded parent now. Not to the point where I'm going to let my 5-year-old do whatever she wants, because I'm going to still give her that discipline and that structure she needs. But I never want to feel like, or make her feel like, only one way is the way to go in life.
Yeah, I don't blame you there. There was some my parents' influence in my life when I was raising my daughters, because I was like, "Hey, you guys need to go do something," because my parents told me, "You graduate high school, you're moving out, you're going to go get a job, you're going to do something." They didn't talk to me about college, they didn't talk to me about finances or any of that other stuff. So I really worked hard trying to fill in those gaps for my daughters. The other thing that I look back on is we were also in the middle of the global war on terrorism, and we were deploying every other year. So I also see where, through no fault of my own or my wife's, there was gaps in our influence that they filled with their friends and stuff. And we've seen some of the bad influences and so forth. that they absorbed because we weren't there.
I agree with you. We were gone a lot, man. I do agree with you, man. There's something I'm learning, and I've learned probably, like you said, being gone a lot, and now that I'm a civilian dad, if you want to call that, but the absence of a father, man, it's crazy how much of a profound impact it has on everybody's life. Your wife, your children. It's kind of looking back at it. It's like you said, we could really sit here and observe those things. When you made that decision to join the Army, what did that whole process look like to you?
That was that adventure, not knowing what the next step was. Going to MEPS, doing the physical, doing the paperwork, signing everything, and then being told, "Hey, you're leaving tomorrow." And they're like, "You're going to Fort Benning, Georgia." I was like, "I don't even know where that's at." The Ranger contract that they offered for new enlistees was something that I was like, "I don't know what it is. Let's do it." They were like, "It's super challenging. Not a lot of people make it." So I was like, "Let's do that. I want the challenge. Let's go do it." So the 11 Bravo thing, I don't know if that would have been good on its own, only because while there's a lot of training there, it's not a lot of technical stuff. So it would not have carried over after the military, which influenced my decision to reclass to a technical MOS after my first enlistment was over. I looked at getting out, and I was at the center for all the people transition out, and I was watching all these other guys. I say kids now, but they were the same age as me. They were all putting down all these different job skills they had. They got to me, and the lady was like, "Hey, what's your MOS?" And I'm like, 11 Bravo. And she's like, "Whoa," and I had like 2 lines of applicable civilian skills. And I was like, this ain't going to work. And that's kind of probably one of the first times I said, "Hey, you know what? What else in life do I need to do to make life better?"
So you go to basic. I just want to backtrack really quickly. You go to basic, Fort Benning. How was basic training for you?
That was a struggle. Well, I don't want to say that was a struggle. That was different than anything I'd ever experienced before, because the structure, the more, it was more of a team than even playing football in high school. There was a lot more depending on each other to get things done. And that focused through basic, AIT, which was kind of just the same thing for an infantry guy. Going to parachute school, that was kind of a neat break for 3 weeks. And then on to regiment through the REP program.
Did you make any honor grad in basic AIT?
There was a couple things that they highlighted, like PT test, fastest road marching, stuff like that. I wasn't really interested in those because it brought a lot of limelight on people, on you or on that person. I noticed that a lot of guys, their sole focus was, "Hey, you know what? I don't care about anything else. I just want that accolade." Whereas I wanted the platoon to look great. I wanted to sit there and make sure my PT test average brought up the average. I wanted to make sure that, our road marching times, that kind of stuff. So I kind of worked more in the team thing versus the trying to find that one separate accolade just for myself.
During that time, were you starting to realize you picked the right MOS? How were you feeling at that time?
I felt great. It was, I was in the best shape of my life. I was out there playing with guns and doing all kinds of crazy stuff. Stuff that I'd never even thought that I would ever do before. The road marching, the up all night, the practice patrols, and actually realizing, hey, this is a life or death thing that I need to pay attention to. Whereas everything else before was kind of, hey, you're getting ready to do the next thing. Whereas now this could be your next thing that you're going to be out there doing.
And then from there, you went straight to jump school?
Straight to jump school. 3 weeks after that, so basic training graduation, we had a weekend off, started jump school Monday morning, did 3 weeks of parachute school, And then probably 3 of the not greatest weeks of my life for the Ranger indoctrination program. And that leaving jump school was where I wondered for the first time if I had made a mistake, because there was over 100 people in our RIP class, and my introduction to the RIP instructors was this staff sergeant walked over to some of us who were kind of waiting after graduation at jump school, and we're like, we've heard all these stories about, these horror stories about RIP and stuff. And there's guys who were already talking about quitting. I told myself, I'm not going to quit. This staff sergeant walked over and he's like, hey, what are you guys doing? And we're like, oh, we're waiting for the RIP guys. And he's like, oh, that's cool. You guys are going to be badass and all this stuff. And then a couple seconds later, it's like a switch flipped. And he's like, who the hell do you guys think you are? You think you want to be a Ranger? He's like, there's a truck over there for your bags, but you know what? You're just going to carry them. And we left the jump school there at Fort Benning and ran with duffel bags and everything we had down over to the Ranger battalion. It sucked. It was terrible.
Holy shit, man.
We started off, I want to say 140, 150 guys. By the time Monday had rolled around, we were organized into a company for RIP. By the time the Monday rolled around, we graduated jump school on Friday. By the time Monday rolled around, we were down to about a platoon of people.
Damn.
They weeded people out they weeded people out that whole weekend. And I remember that Sunday night, the RIP instructor came out and he's like, we're not starting with this number of people. He's like, we got to call some people out. He's like, I need some people to quit. He's like, tell you what, we'll just stand at the position of attention till I get enough people to quit. So we stood outside in the sun on that stupid afternoon in Georgia at the position of attention for about 4 hours. Anybody that moved was tossed out. Anybody who was like, I'm done, I quit, I'm out. But I think that Monday morning we started with 40 or 50 people. It's not a lot.
Now, RIP, and I apologize for my ignorance, but RIP is different from Ranger School, or is it the same thing?
It's kind of a pre-Ranger course, but it's designed so there's a distinction that not a lot of people realize in the military. So just having a Ranger tab means you've went to Ranger school, but it doesn't necessarily mean you're in the Rangers. So the 75th Ranger Regiment, the 3 battalions with it, that was all part of the Ranger Regiment. So you didn't have to have your tab to go into the regiment, which is why they had RIP. And RIP was designed for E1s to E4s, and that was to get you into the program. Then after that, you'd eventually go to Ranger School.
Did you go to Ranger School?
I did. I dislocated my ankle, and at that point, because of the injury, I left the regiment and went to 82nd Airborne Division.
Now let's backtrack. What were some of the biggest takeaways that you learned from going from basic, AIT, airborne school, to RIP, all that training in a consolidated amount of time? What is the biggest takeaway you took away from that, this being your first experience in the Army?
Everything is mental. It's all mental. The guys that gave up on road marches, the guys that quit early on PT tests, those guys already were just looking for that out. The guys that didn't make it through basic training, the guys that were at airborne school, they're ready to jump out of the plane, and next thing you know, they freeze in the door. It's 100% mental. You can accomplish so much if you just have that right mentality. And it's not something that you're going to sit there and say, check, I got it. It's a muscle, and you got to exercise it, because you'll get to a point to where, hey, I'm good. And then you'll realize, oh, you know what? Today I'm not good. And you got to recage it and start that mental process all over again. 100%. Life is a mental exercise. Doesn't matter whether you're talking about saving money or going on a 3-mile run and finishing that 3-mile run. Even if you walk to the end of it, but you still finish it, it's all mental.
How old are you when this was going on?
I had just turned 17 when I went to basic.
So your parents had to sign the waiver?
Yep.
I said this in the last podcast, that every good moment has an end, every bad moment has an end. So you at 17 learning this, that your mindset and your mentality gets you further in life. How did that make you feel? Because that's a big deal right there. Some people haven't even realized that now in their 40s.
That right there was really helped shape my life, because one, I realized that you may not be able to accomplish everything, but that doesn't mean you can't go out and accomplish things.
That's deep.
What it is, because
That's deep.
I think one of the biggest lies people tell their kids is you can go out and do and be anything you want. Well, come on, man. I'm not going to tell my daughter she can be a quarterback on an NFL team. I'm not going to tell, somebody's kid, oh, you know what? You want to be a basketball player? You'll make it, because it's not realistic. So one of the things I told myself, doing those road marches, doing, being up all night on patrols and stuff like that is, you can grow into these different things that you want to accomplish, but you still have to have realistic expectations of what you're doing. And when you have these unrealistic expectations, they crush you. When you don't meet goal after goal after goal, it crushes you. So you go out there and you want to accomplish these things, and if you don't have that mindset to go out there and push yourself to accomplish them, you're going to find an obstacle.
Damn, that's so correct, man. That is so correct. That was good, Irv. That was real good, man. Because I think and we'll use something as simple as losing weight. People create these crazy expectations, right? Especially now in an industry that's flooded with steroids, weight loss shots, and Ozempic, and all this medicine. People create these unrealistic expectations, and when they don't meet them, they just quit. Instead of just dialing back, recaging, refocusing on their goal and making a realistic one, they just quit. And they jump right back into the endless cycle. And it happens with a lot of things. Addiction, a lot of things, man. And those are just some quick examples right there. But it happens with a lot of things. Careers, saving money. But that was good, man. That was real deep. You get to 75th Ranger Regiment. Did you always know you were going there, or
yeah, I knew when I signed the paperwork at MEPS, I was on a Ranger contract, so I knew I was going there. I think it was like a 11 X-ray, I think is what they called it at the time. So I knew that's where I was going. The platoon that I was in basic training, we were all 11 X-rays. We were all going basic AIT, airborne school, RIP, all together. Everybody else was a mix of 11 Bravos, 11 Mikes, 11 Charlies. They didn't have the SF contracts back then. But, so yeah, everybody in that platoon was going. I still talked to one of the guys that made it. There's only 4 of us out of my original platoon, basic training platoon, that actually got through. And my RIP class, which was a mix of several groups of people, we were only a baker's dozen for our graduation. I think it was 14 of us. My wife looks at the picture and she's like, wow, you look really thin. I was like, the class looked really thin. But
going through all that training together, because you guys are all in the same platoon, going through all this training, did you build some good relationships?
Yeah, so there's one guy I still talk to. He and I, we'll sit back and talk about, the way our careers diverged in where he went and what I ended up doing. The One of the things I tell people, is it's never too late to mend bridges and stuff like that. Like he and I didn't talk for a long time, and then I looked him up. I'm like, let me talk to him. When I left the regiment for the injury, he's like, hey, you should come back and stuff. And then I started looking at a couple of things. I started thinking about what do I want to do later in life, and I started looking at like the older guys in my platoon at the Rangers. These guys were eating Motrin like candy, and the guys that were still there that were in their late in their career were bad knees, bad backs, bad ankles, all kinds of stuff. And I started thinking to myself, I don't want to know if that's necessarily the path I want to go. So, he and I had tried to have that discussion. It kind of separated, not on the greatest of terms, but I ended up reaching back out to him, and he's like, hey, here's where I'm at now. And I told him about where I was at, water under the bridge. But if I'd never reached out to him, I don't know if, what that would have been like.
Yeah, that's true too, man. Sometimes it takes that one person to try to mend a relationship. And it's even something I'm trying to do here with Heroes Have Wings, mend some relationships I've had with people, because I think there's a lot of misunderstanding in the Army, a lot of emotion, where a lot of us are young. We don't really process and think things through. We just get mad about something, or we may overreact, including myself, and we may not necessarily burn those bridges, but create an issue when there really doesn't need to be an issue.
Yeah, we do.
And you don't realize those things until you get older. I'm even realizing the way I handle things with people, when I know that I'm getting irritated or upset, I'll take a deep breath, step back, and I'll just tell somebody, hey, listen, right now is the best time not to talk about it. Let's just revisit this later. And they'll ask me why, and I'll tell them, I don't want to say something that's going to hurt your feelings or that's going to hurt our relationship. So I'd rather just leave it alone right now. And then when we're both cool, calm, and collective, we can revisit it and try to talk about it again.
Yeah, I don't know what takes everybody to that point. I know for me, the probably when the war kicked off, what really kind of brought that home was starting to lose people. And, most, probably everybody I knew that ended up losing, I don't think I was ever on in a bad way with them as far as relationship wise, but there was definitely gaps in where, hey, I hadn't talked to that person in a while or whatever. And that right there kind of hits home a little bit.
I agree with you, man. And we're going to talk about that too, how life's short, precious. You got to take time to make things meaningful in life, because you may miss that opportunity. Then that will be one regret you have later on. You get to the regiment. How soon did you go to Ranger School?
It was a couple years later, but even while I was there, probably I thought RIP was probably the hardest thing I'd have to do. But once I got to the battalion, got to my squad, and basically treated like a prior, they're like, we don't want you here. You need to quit, and all this other stuff. And I didn't realize at the time, man, but that took a beating, and it was all because they wanted someone to quit in garrison, not in the field, not on a deployment, not someplace where now you're a liability. So, that was a couple of weeks of proving, yeah, I want to be here. Yes, I'm going to get harassed. Yes, I'm going to sit there and low crawl through the barracks floors, trying to polish the floors with a buffer pad on my stomach. Everything and anything you can think of to make you want to quit. But then, that was a pretty good adventure. That was pre-war on terror. That was going places. We'd jump into places. We'd do stuff. We've all seen the videos like in Miami and stuff where, it's in the middle of the night, and all of a sudden people are like, "Oh, look at this video I've got. There's a helicopter flying through downtown and stuff." And that was some of the weird oddball stuff that we'd go out and do. We'd go out and do airport seizures. We'd jump on a civilian airport and seize this airport. And then we'd leave before the sun came up, and a couple weeks later it'd be in the news like, yeah, there was something going on there, and we're like, oh, that was us. That was us making that noise. People would be like, I don't know what was going on. And, planes were flying over houses at 200 feet or something. But, once again, what happened to Bat stayed in Bat, so we didn't talk about it. So, it made it for a nice, tight group of people because, you didn't talk, there's nobody to talk to but the next guy, next bunk over to you.
Mm-hmm. Looking back through all those things they put you through and knowing, maybe not knowing, but realizing that, hey, one day I can be in harm's way, be in a combat situation, and now where you're at in life, do you feel those lessons and those things they put you through were important to make you the person you are? Or anybody the person they are? Because like you said, they want to really check if you have that mental fortitude and not quit. Do you think those things were important?
Absolutely. I look back on some of those things I learned early on in my career, and I realized that I took some of that stuff for granted when I went to SEER school. My second time going to SEER school at Fort Rucker, and there's these guys that they were either street to seat or they were some other MOS that like, hey, you know what, I'm going to be a pilot because it looks cool or whatever. And now they're out there doing this weird stuff, and we're cold, we're hungry, we haven't eaten, and it was the end of the world to some of these guys. I mean, you were there, and I'm like, I'm cold, so what? I'm wet, so what? I know it ends in 5-6 days. Who cares? And it translates even further out to those deployments when you'd see those guys on a deployment, and you're like, man, what's wrong? And they're like, oh, we just started this deployment. 11 months is so far away, and you're like, you looking at it yourself, and you're like, so what? It's 11 months. We can do this. But then you gotta sit there and say, okay, you know what? I can't have this guy checking out on me. I can't. It's a funny story. No names, but I'm flying in Afghanistan, and it was a long day, and the person next to me in the right seat, I was like, hey, what are you doing over there? And we heard this, and the crew chief in the back's like, sir, I think he's asleep. And the crew chief reached over the seat and hit him on the head, and he's like, oh, well, what's up? And that he'd checked out. I'm not sitting there saying that like he fell asleep on purpose or anything like that, but there's that mental resiliency that, hey, I've got to be that. I got to push forward through this a little bit longer.
I agree with you, man. A lot. Being a SEER instructor, I had a lot of those conversations, do different phases of training with people. I seen a lot of people break, man. I would look them in their eyes and tell them, listen, because, we could take a break sometimes if we had to, or if they asked for it. I won't talk about the things we had to do, but I would tell them, say, listen, guys, you have to realize if this is a real world situation, what's going on here is not even, I can't even express to you what would be going on to you in the real world. And I think a lot of people, some people, not a lot, but some people need to go through that just to build that mental fortitude and that resilience to keep fighting on and keep pressing on. Because like you said, hell, this may be the first time that they experience anything hard. You just got to remind them that, hey, we're doing this for a reason. Stay focused.
Yeah.
Stay focused on the task at hand. Understand what we're doing. Let's keep it moving, because you don't want to become a liability. That is, and one thing we taught at SEER school is that we don't leave no one behind, and we make sure everybody gets home. But hell, don't become that person that I have to carry you home. At least walk, and I'll help you through the way.
So I remember there was the steps at Regiment. They all had different sayings on the steps as you walked up. They're all different, like motivational things. And the one that I probably will never forget was, "Don't make hard harder."
Mm. Bro, that is deep. Say that one more time for me, man.
Don't make hard harder.
Damn. And everybody out there, the way you make hard harder is by overthinking shit and dwelling on shit.
Yep.
Being negative about shit. Just smile about that shit. Keep it pushing. A lot of you guys that I've been talking to, I didn't even notice about a lot of you guys know this, but a lot of you guys been to RIP and in Ranger Regiment. And a lot of you guys, all you guys have a certain personality and trait about you that you guys do not give up no matter what happens. We're just going to keep fighting and pushing through.
I think that's one of the things that Gary Simmons and I had in common was, he went to task force and, he had to go through Green Platoon. And it's the same thing. They need mechanics, they need crew chiefs, they need guys, but they'd rather go short than have a guy who's going to be a problem.
Mm-hmm. That's true. Because cancer on a team, man, is very bad. That shit'll spread like wildfire.
Yeah, absolutely.
You got to get rid of that. So you go to Ranger school, you hurt your ankle. What happened next?
At that point, I transitioned out to Fort Bragg, North Carolina, and I was an E5. I was right at that point where my enlistment was ending, and if I would stayed in the infantry any longer, I'd have been too senior as an enlisted guy to reclass to a new MOS and start all over. So I reached that point, and they're like, "Hey, if you're going to reclass, you got to do it now." And they're like, even then, they're like, it's going to be a struggle because you're going to be an NCO. You're not going to be the line guy. So you're going to have to not only know the job, but still work as an NCO. So I looked at all the different jobs out there, and there's some jobs I really want to do that I wasn't sure. This is pre-internet. It's I can Google and find out what stuff was. So I ended up going to aviation maintenance and becoming an aviation mechanic to be able to take a skill that I could see and directly translate to something on the outside.
Before I get to you becoming an aviation mechanic, what was your biggest takeaway from being a regiment and your biggest life lesson there?
Biggest life lesson there was that everything is mental. There is no challenge you can't accept and overcome. The guys at Regiment were really good about putting things into a perspective and training you to be able to overcome things. So they didn't sit there and say, "Hey, you know what? You're out there and you're running a 14-minute 2-mile. So tomorrow we're going to go start running 10-minute 2 miles." They really stressed that the increments, if that makes sense. So out there doing road marches, and I didn't realize at the time, but I look back on it and I could see it in basic. We started off with a 3-mile road march, no pack, no nothing. We're just walking in PTs, and then next thing you know, we're in boots. And then fast forward to Regiment, where we're out there, we're weighing rucks, and we get to a point where we're doing road marches, and they're covering the scales up so that if you're below this weight, it doesn't matter whether it's 49 pounds or 48 pounds. It doesn't matter because you're not meeting the minimum. But then they would just keep incrementally creeping stuff up. So I always told myself that when I see a challenge, when I see something, when I see adversity, don't sit there and look at, "Oh my God, there's this huge thing in front of me." Find it, find the pieces, find the cracks in it, and peel it apart. So when I looked at reclassing, I didn't sit there and look at it as, "Well, I'm reclassing." I looked at it as, I'm an NCO. I need to learn this job inside and out. And then I need to be able to teach the job inside and out. And then I need to be able to lead guys and sit there and say, hey, you know what, you're struggling at something. Let's figure out how we can make it better in a way that you're going to see that increase, that you're going to see that improvement without somebody saying, hey, oh, I messed it up again. And it's just wrong. Does that make sense?
Yep, makes a lot of sense. What was your most memorable moment at regiment?
Probably when I finally felt that acceptance that I was part of the team there. Not just having the scroll on my shoulder, but really being part of the team. You know, the guys like, hey, you know, they included me into discussions, included me into, hey guys, we're thinking about planning this, or, you know, we got this weekend coming up and we're going to go do stuff. There's that team camaraderie, that switch that just flipped. And I think that was probably my best memory, is realizing that, hey, I made it. I still got to work, but I made it, and I'm part of the team.
Yeah, and I think that's something that's very important. And one thing I'm noticing, just listening to everybody's story, they put you through this process. So when they accept you on the team, it's a significant event in life. And that's something we all yearn for in life, to be a part of something, to be on a team, to be accepted. So I could see how that was very important to you.
It's interesting because, you know, so I've got friends, you know, I don't even, they're probably not still there anymore, but those friends and stuff that I made in the Rangers, the Rangers are just a stepping stone inside the special ops community. And as they went out and did other things and stuff, that acceptance never left. Even though I left, I had proven that point that, hey, I did it. I was there. So when I ran into guys that were other places, a perfect example is Gary Simmons. You know, there's a little bond there that he and I share, because we both know, hey, we went someplace and we did it. And there's guys that are stationed other places. There's a guy I ran into in Afghanistan when we were supporting the special ops guys, and he and I looked at each other. We're both like, "I know you," and he's like, "I know you." And, you know, and there's a lot of guys that are like, "Hey, you know, do you know this person?" We're like, "Oh yeah, I know that person." And it's amazing how that has held even afterwards. It's kind of like the bond we have after leaving the military, after leaving the warlords. It's still there.
Now, when you became that 68 Gulf, an aircraft airframe mechanic, what was that aircraft specific, or was
it was just general, but it required learning. It required a lot of OJT because it was general, so they could take you and put you on anything. So there was a lot of mentoring there, a lot of, hey, I'm just like you learning this, but we're learning it together, and taking these guys that were brand new to the Army and not just teaching them the job, but teaching them about the military, trying to get them incorporated into the team, if that makes sense. And
makes a lot of sense.
my first female soldier, I remember bringing her into my small little cubicle, and they're like, "Hey, you know, she's assigned to your squad." I remember I started talking to her, and she broke down and started crying. And I'm like, I don't know what to do here. So I go out and get my platoon sergeant. And my platoon sergeant's like, "What did you say to her?" And I'm like, just started talking to her about, you know, welcome to the unit stuff. We go back in, and he starts talking to her, and she's like, "I'm just so happy to be here." I was like, okay, that's a new one on me. Just the emotion of just being happy to be there.
And that's huge. And for everybody, just so you understand where Ervin's coming from, when you're in back in the day, when you're in, I don't know how it is now, but combat MOSs, there wasn't no women around, no ladies around at all. So when you go from being an 11 Bravo infantry or a Ranger guy, and then you go into aviation and you start being introduced to working with women, it's different. and you have to learn a lot of things fast to make sure that you're you're staying within your realms, not being inappropriate, none of those things. So that's another learning curve that you have to learn pretty fast.
Absolutely.
What year was this when this was happening? When you were making that transition?
That was, we'll say it was 97, 98, somewhere around there.
Nice. So you go. Where do you go? Did you have to go to an AIT for that school?
Yep, I went to Fort Eustis, Virginia to go to the AIT for that. And it was interesting because I was an E5 going to that. The mind games that the AIT instructors would sit there and play, like, oh, you're a senior guy. You better know this stuff. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, you guys got to bring your A game for this. You're not mentally messing with me to learn this stuff. I'm going to learn this stuff, but you're sitting here trying to razz me is not going to work. It's one of those things where learn something, that mentality thing from years ago carried over just to keep assisting me.
Did they try to hold you to a higher standard based off your rank alone?
Yep, absolutely.
How was that experience?
It's one of those things where, you sit there and say, okay, I have this task to complete. Let me complete it correctly, not necessarily, with the guy holding the watch and saying, hey, you know what, you're an NCO, you should be faster than this, you should be doing this. And I'm like, you know what? If I mess it up, it's just going to take that much longer, and I lose that credibility with the guys I'm trying to work with.
So you leave AIT. Where do you go next?
That was back initially to Fort Bragg, and then I went out to the 25th Infantry Division out in Hawaii.
How was Hawaii?
It was pretty good. It little weird at times. They want to do POV inspections on a 4-day weekend, even though you could drive around the island in 3 hours. It's wintertime. Sleeves got to be down. There's that weird big Army mentality that I was insulated from when I was in the Rangers, where common sense predicated everything.
Yeah, that's
yeah,
you guys had to have your sleeves down in Hawaii.
because it was wintertime.
Is that even such a thing? Wintertime in Hawaii?
No, because the temperature's the same all year round.
Exactly.
But it's like a POV inspection. Where are you going to go on a 4-day weekend that you can't go Monday after you get off work?
Yeah, it's one of those things you, me, and a lot of us all talked about. At what point do we say, all right, guys, this makes absolutely no sense? When are we going to stop doing the things that, one of the biggest things that I hated so much in Army, we do it just because we do it.
Yep.
Or they did it like that when I got here. All right, what point are we going to be leaders and say, all right, let's change this. This is not effective or makes any sense. How was your time at the 25th Infantry?
It was good. It went by too quick. I would have loved to stay there, but then when my buddy and I were PCSing, we were both same rank. We were both E6s. I got orders to Fort Bragg, North Carolina, because I was an airborne guy. He got orders to Fort Eustis, Virginia, to be an instructor. And then we got those purse scrims. You remember those? We both got purse scrims on the same day. We already got our orders and stuff. And I'm like, well, I got my purse scrim. He got a purse scrim. We're like, what's going on? So we both open our purse scrims. We're like, oh, orders are deleted. I'm like, well, I wonder what that means. The next day, we both get purse scrims, and we both go to the opposite assignment. So he goes to Fort Bragg, and I go to Fort Eustis. I'm like, this is dumb. I'm already airborne qualified. I want to go to Bragg. He's not airborne qualified. He doesn't want to go to Bragg. So one of those weird things. Don't ask me why, but it worked out great because I met my wife at Fort Eustis, Virginia. So looking back on it, not a bad thing most of the time.
So you get there, now you're an instructor. Did you feel like you were proficient enough to be an instructor?
Absolutely, because I worked my butt off to make sure that I was proficient.
What was your most memorable moment in Hawaii and your biggest takeaway?
The biggest takeaway from Hawaii was the fact that we did stuff, once again, pre-war on terror, but we were doing stuff for no logical reason. My Hopefully that kind of answers the question. There was a lot of just weird stuff. Hawaii was always kind of its own weird animal. People would sit there and would tell you, if you go to Hawaii, it's not like the rest of the Army. It definitely was not. There was no deployments. There was no JRTCs or anything like that. We'd fly over to the Big Island once in a while, but that was about it. You could be home the next day if you wanted. But it never really felt like being in the Army. It kind of felt more like, hey, I'm in some kind of weird training scenario.
Do you think that's why they did the things they did? To remind you guys once in a while that, hey, you're still in the big Army. We don't want you guys to get too complacent, too relaxed out here?
Well, no, because people were overly complacent. In fact, prior to the wars, JRTCs and NTCs was just unheard of out there because it was too expensive to send, a brigade of infantry guys. Just think about just the plane trip itself. To send a brigade to JRTC or an NTC, it was too expensive to ship the helicopters, all this stuff. So Hawaii was a great assignment in the fact that you lived in Hawaii. But if I had my choice, would I want to be stationed there again? No, not really.
And you never went back after that, right?
No. I did have a good friend of mine that was stationed in Hawaii. This is back after flight school and stuff. And it was during the wars. So he PCS to Hawaii, 25th Infantry Division deployed. They did a year, came back to Hawaii, was there for a year doing NTCs and JRTCs. So he spent maybe all of 6 months on the island. And then they deployed again. That was back when we were just doing those back-to-back rotations. And as soon as he got back off that rotation, he PCS'd. So I was talking to him. He's like, yeah, I think I spent maybe 6 months out of a 3-year tour actually in Hawaii.
What was your most memorable moment there?
Most memorable moment, I went to EMT school while I was there. And while as an EMT working accidents and stuff like that, I was out there actually frontline saving someone's life, and kind of gave me a new perspective on helping people. Before that, before becoming an EMT, it was kind of a long distance, hey, we're helping people. Obviously the wars hadn't happened or anything like that, so there's the peacekeeping things and stuff like that. But there was no tangible, hey, I got my hands on helping somebody. So that was nice, actually being able to actually help people.
That left you with a good feeling, huh?
Most of the time, yes.
What made you want to do EMT school?
It went back to just wanting to help people out. I was talking to our local medics from that were in the Army, and they were talking about how they were getting tons and tons of extra training. And I didn't think about it. I was like, why do you guys get extra training? And they said, because Hawaii's isolated. They said, there's any kind of mass casualty event, you're talking 4 or 5 hours before someone could fly in from the States. So they said, if you want the best EMT paramedic training, you do it in Hawaii. They're absolutely right.
Yeah. So you leave Hawaii, you go to Eustis, you show up, be an instructor. What was that like? And what was your initial reaction to it?
So that was my first time as an AIT instructor. My only real previous experience besides going to AIT for that same school was basic training, and it was kind of a culture shock because they didn't play. There was a lot of kids glove stuff going on. Oh, the soldier's struggling. Let's figure out all the different problems and talk to them and all this stuff. And sometimes, you can sit there and you can look at a situation and say, hey, you know what? Sometimes kid gloves not necessarily the right answer. Sometimes it is. Sometimes, they had something happen at home or whatever, and they keep it bottled up. And other times there's guys out there that are just for lack of better terms, are bullies. They're not there to be the team player.
Mm-hmm. What are kid gloves?
So when I grew up in the military and basic training and stuff like that, if you messed up, you were out there doing push-ups. That was part of the corrective training at the time. There was no dropping an AIT student for push-ups. There was no, they could sit there and say, "Hey, Sarge, what's going on today?" And you're like, "Hey, you're talking to an NCO. You stand parade rest and it's Sergeant." They're like, "Oh, my bad. My bad, Sergeant. My, sorry, Sergeant." Something along those lines. But you weren't allowed to really address that stuff.
So they were lacking basic etiquette, essentially.
Basic etiquette, basic military
Bearing.
That was what we're looking for.
Hey, that professionalism in military bearing is very essential.
It is.
Very essential until you form a relationship with individuals and you know that they could at least wear both those hats and maintain the professionalism and the personal relationship, right? AIT, there's no personal relationships because just the environment and the situation at hand, you're in a training environment, so there can't be any personal relationships. But I think even at AIT, that sets the tone for the rest of the Army.
It does, 100%.
You got these young soldiers showing up to their units, and they don't have no military bearing, no professionalism, and then they get corrected because at the unit, we can smoke you. You are going to do push-ups.
And we've seen that. We've seen that with new crew chiefs that show up.
Yep. So that was interesting. That's interesting to hear. How long were you at USIS for?
Just at 2 years before I got picked up for flight school.
When did you realize you wanted to become a pilot?
I think that was just the next evolution of moving my career forward. I was looking at either getting out because that enlistment was coming up. So I was like, okay, what's the next step forward? How do I move my career forward? And I think that was kind of that time back in the late 90s, early 2000s when they started trying to make this career map for soldiers to look at and say, hey, by this point you should be here. Then you got this school, and we still see it even as warrant officers are like, hey, here's your schools, here's your career map. And I just didn't see myself being a 68 Golf. What I started looking at was all these 68 series guys funneled up to E7, which was a 68 kilo, and out in the companies, out in the units at the divisions and stuff, you'd have a 68 kilo platoon sergeant, and you'd have a couple of those guys, but then you have 30 or 40 mechanics, 68 series guys, all funneling up to that one thing. And I realized there's a really heavy ceiling up there that I started seeing these guys that I was AIT instructors with that were 16, 17, 18-year guys. And I'm like, I don't want to be that. My career needs to move forward, not stagnate because of the way the promotions are. And that was, let's say that I'm trying to remember if Clinton was still there, or if Bush had taken over yet. But yeah, were you in when Clinton was the president?
What years? I can't jog my memory.
It was just
I joined in 99.
So probably because I don't think Bush had taken over yet. But it was just, everything was just glacially slow. And I didn't see that for myself. I'd been moving forward so far in my entire career. I've been moving forward one school to the next school every couple of years, doing something new. And I realized, okay, I'm an AIT instructor. What else is there? Well, I could go be a drill sergeant. But what else was there really there? I started talking to a couple of friends of mine. I started looking at going back to special operations. There's a couple of organizations that recruited from all the MOSs. It didn't matter which MOS was. Special Forces was one of them. So I started talking to my friends, and I started thinking about, what am I going to do? Where am I going to go? One of them, I looked at SF for a little while, but because I was already in E6, I didn't want to go in there already looking at trying to be promoted to a team sergeant as an E7 with just being brand new to SF. That's usually the guys get there around E4, E5 time frame. So I started looking at OCS. I started looking at all my options. OCS was an option. Warrant officer was an option. Going out, getting out and using the GI Bill to go to college was an option. So I started thinking about what do I want to do. And I thought I started thinking about flying. It looks fun. Flying is a translatable skill to the outside. That's what kind of steered me away from going back to the special ops. Yeah, that's fun, but where was I going to go with it?
And that's understandable that you're thinking ahead like that. So 99, jog my memory, Clinton was on his way out. 2000, Bush took over.
Sounds about right, yeah.
If it serves me correctly. So I only spent those few months under Clinton, then President Bush. You said you met your wife at Eustis.
Correct.
At what point did you meet her, and what was she doing?
She's an AIT instructor as well. She got there just a couple months after me. So AIT is generally mid-grade guys, E5s, E6s, E7s as instructors. Most of those guys, if you think back to our military careers, a lot of those guys are married. A lot of those guys have family and stuff. So I was single. She was single. Just kind of gravitated toward each other to avoid the, possibly talking to students at different places or wherever. Because we'd run into students out there on the weekends and, it sucked. I'd have to go to places like, I'd go hang out with friends in Dam Neck, Virginia, or out in Norfolk to get away from all the AIT students. So during the week, Joey and I would end up grabbing lunch and hanging out and stuff like that. And that just kind of grew into that kind of sort of relationship. And that's, the start of it there.
Yeah. How long you guys been married for?
See, 20, going on 25, 26 years now.
26 years. Started with lunch, 26 years later. Yep. You're still together. That's a beautiful thing. Tell Joey I said hi.
I will do that.
Appreciate that. So when you decided to make that decision for warrant officer school, become an aviator, what did that whole process look like for you?
That was a great process. If you remember that checklist of all the things you had to do, it was like 18 things long. Everything had to be dated within a certain period. So you couldn't do item 1 and then wait 2 years because item 1 would expire. So, I working on that warrant officer packet and talking to guys and listening to them talk about, it's so hard, this, that, and everything else. I'm like, dude, this is paperwork, man. It's just... So that perseverance, that overcoming an obstacle thing was once again kicking back in, that made it so that I wasn't just discouraged by the paperwork. And I was told by a CW4, Alan Rosicka, that worked at Rucker, he's like, hey, this is designed to weed people out. That's why there's so many stupid things.
And I was just going to say that I think the Army, even in the civilian section, I'm seeing it now, people make things arduous and cumbersome to weed you out, or really ask yourself, how bad do you want to do this? Because people think they want to do something until it's time to really start putting in the work. And then when they realize, oh man, I really have to do some shit, I got to do all this, I'm not doing this. And if you could just weed people out at the front end, right? So you do all the tedious paperwork, then you have to go through these processes of they're gonna put you through some hard points, make it hard for you. It's all about really testing and seeing if people really want it.
It is 100% that. And that mental game, it never quits. When I got to Fort Rucker, my walk school class, I was in walk school with another Ranger that was a friend of mine. And it was one of those moments where, like, oh, hey, you're here, I'm here. We know each other. This is going back years. And, he got through walk school, and when it came to the studying in flight school, that arduous everyday studying, it shocked me that broke him. He didn't finish flight school. But he was already a warrant officer. So they said, hey, what do you want to do? And he's like, well, let me go up to Bragg and let me let me try out at the Kennedy Center. And so they sent him up there. He ended up being an SF guy. But, you know, it's something that I didn't think about right away till after we started doing deployments to Afghanistan and Iraq. And it made me realize that, no matter how tough someone is, everybody's got that breaking point.
Oh, yeah.
And everybody's breaking point is not the same.
Correct.
And, I'm sure there's a challenge out there that, will break everybody. Everybody's breakable. So, it shocked me that broke him. And looking back on it, one of the things I always ask myself is, could I have been better at assisting him with the studying and stuff? And I still talk to him, and it's crazy because I asked him that question. I said, "Hey, man, could I have been a better study person?" And he's like, "No, dude." He's like, "You did absolutely everything you could." He's like, "I just didn't have it." He's like, "I just did not have it." And I mean, he was a great guy. He could go out there. He was out there running 12-minute 2-mile PT test. We'd go out and do 18-mile road marches, and it was just crazy that the studying is what got him.
Two things I want to add to that. One, as a SEER instructor, I learned that everybody has a breaking point. Everybody has a breaking point. It's a different place. It's something different for everybody. But what are you gonna do after you break?
It's a good question.
The second thing, that's something I always ask people. What are you gonna do when you do break? Because you're gonna break. Everybody breaks, man. Everybody. I don't care who you are. You're gonna break. And the second thing is, you just said something very important. Just because you're not good at one thing doesn't necessarily mean you're a loser and a failure, because you may be great at several other things that other people aren't good at. So going through that struggle in life and figuring out who you are, you have to figure out those things that you love to do. Like, always rely on your strengths. I tell people that. You can work on your weaknesses, but also use your strengths to your benefit, because those things will carry you a long way. What was your biggest takeaway from Fort Eustis? And besides meeting the love of your life, what was your most memorable moment there?
Getting selected for flight training. And because I knew at that point, that was one of those things, unlike everything else in my career, hey, do you want a Ranger contract? Hey, do you want to go to airborne school? It was easy to do, whereas going to warrant officer training was something that nobody said, "Hey, do you want to do this? Sign here. Let's go do this." It was 100% effort on my part. Just like, you had to want to do it. And that was probably my biggest, that was a huge moment in my life, realizing that I got control. And, I'm accomplishing something. I'm moving my life forward.
Your biggest takeaway? What was your biggest takeaway?
My biggest takeaway was that up until being an instructor at Eustis, I always carried the battalion mentality with me, that you're going to push your guys forward and you're going to go forward, and that's just the way it is. At Eustis, because we kind of had to play the kid glove game with some of the trainees, it made me realize that there's other ways to do things. There's other ways to motivate guys. The breaking a guy down isn't always the best answer type thing.
How hard is warrant officer school and flight school for you?
Warrant officer school was easy. Two really good friends of mine, my warrant officer school, we had probably a third of the class was SF guys going to become warrants. So both my roommates were SF guys. It was just fun. Warrant officer school, what was that, 3 weeks or 6 weeks or whatever that was just fun. We just played games, messed with the instructors. one of my best friends, Gene DeCrisci, got himself just in all kinds of trouble. And then when the instructor's like, you know what? He's like, you and I, we're gonna have a come to Jesus moment. And he sent everybody to chow. And he's like, you're not eating today. Talking to Gene, and I was like, shoot, like I'm not leaving Gene. So I fall out, and the instructor's looking at me. He's like, what are you doing? He's like, I told you to go eat. And I'm like, can't just leave a candidate by themselves. That's one of the rules. He's like, get out of here. And I'm like, no, you're testing me. I'm not breaking the rule. I'm gonna stay with Gene. He's like, you want some of this too? So we spent that whole lunch just doing push-ups and flutter kicks and everything else. But I mean, it was just fun. It was mind games all over again from Rip. Except those guys were just not as serious. They were amateur players on that game, if that makes sense. Flight school, there was challenge there. Uh there was so much studying that your career hinged on that. But there was that stress right there that if you fail this, what are you going to go do? What's going to happen to you? And you know I don't know anybody that failed out other than a friend of mine that ended up going to SF. But I'd heard the stories. Oh, they take the warrant officer down away from you, and you go back to being enlisted, and all kinds of stuff. So that was kind of the yin to the yang of, hey, I did this myself. Well, now, I'm in this. I gotta finish this. So,
Hell, that's a mind game in its own, right?
absolutely. In fact,
Like, where do you go after flight school if you don't make it? So you only have one choice but to make the shit.
yep. And so I didn't let myself have these breaks. And you remember all those bubbles and stuff? So going through flight school, I went through flight school with 0 bubbles. I rolled from aeromed to primary right to instruments right to the advanced the 60 course. And Gene DeCrisci was there the whole time with me, and we were just keeping each other in check as much as we could. But we just kept pounding it out to get done with it, because we knew that if we started getting those bubbles and taking those breaks and stuff, where do you let that mind creep in of, hey, I got doubts now, because you hear about the next guy studying or struggling in the next course, and we didn't want that. So that was a hard push through. Walk school to flight school graduation was 11 months and like 1 week. I mean, it was fast.
Damn, that is fast. I think mine was 15 months, but I had a break in between. I had one break, had some personal issues going on, so I had to fix those things. But 15 months I was at flight school, I was done. That's warrant officer school
Right.
to then the flight school. What year did you go to flight school?
That was 2003.
2003.
Yep.
Let's backtrack. What were you doing 9/11?
9/11, I was an instructor at Fort Eustis, Virginia. And
What was that day like for you?
so there was a couple of things, a lot of mixed emotions. One, I was an instructor at Fort Eustis, Virginia. I felt absolutely useless. And then two, I felt like the military had just let our country down, because we had people dying. We had people jumping out of buildings because they didn't want to burn to death in our own country. So probably one of the top 3 maddest points of my life. Like that was a rough couple weeks there. I had a couple buddies of mine reach out to me that were still doing stuff, and they're like, hey, just checking on you and stuff. And that goes back to that resiliency, that friendship, that bond stuff. I was glad they reached out, but I was also just honestly, I was super disappointed in myself, because if I would have known that 9/11 was coming, obviously hindsight being what it is, I would have stayed in the Rangers. I would have stayed exactly where I was at, eating the crap every day to be able to be ready for that stuff to happen. But, back in the 90s, nobody expected anything like that. That was probably one of my lowest points of my military career. I absolutely hated going to work. Nothing changed. At Eustis, other than it was harder to get on base, nothing changed. Everybody, the students joked, the instructors joked, and I'm like, there's people out there dying. The mentality just pissed me off.
I don't think people understand the gravity of the situation until it involves them. And in fact, I said this a few days ago as well. Right now, we live in a time where people struggle to understand other people's problems because it's not their problem.
Right.
Right. So they're very insensitive. They want to make other people's problems trivial because they're not dealing with it. But as soon as those other people's problems become now your problem, now it's a problem.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It does. So, stupid little story, but when I was still in the Rangers, we went on a deployment, and there was a moment. There was a lot of tension, but because we were problem solvers, we didn't let the fact that we don't got any ammo be the problem. I remember the platoon sergeant came out and he gave everybody blanks. Everybody had blanks for their rifles. He's like, take off the blank adapters. He's like, get out your cleaning kits. He's like, drop a cleaning rod down your rifle. He's like, we're not going out. We're not going to be a bunch of prisoners. He's like, if the situation goes seriously south, he's like, we're going to surprise these guys. And I don't know if you've ever shot a cleaning rod out of a rifle, but it'll do some damage. And I mean, that was the kind of mentality that we had when I was at battalion. Was we were going to adapt, we were going to overcome. We were not going to let a problem be so insurmountable that we couldn't deal with it. And when I was at Eustis, it was like, oh, hey, this just happened. Now everybody's biggest bitch was, well, I got to wait in line 25 minutes to get through the gate, which was stupid in of itself because nobody's going to attack Eustis. There's other places out there that way more important, you know what I'm saying? It was, the mentality was just ridiculous. It was kind of like PT runs in Iraq and Afghanistan. Like, what do we do? Why?
I was going to compare it to not having internet in Afghanistan and Iraq. When I first got there, that wasn't even an option. But 2012, damn, 10 years later, people are upset about it all. I'm like, do you guys understand that there are infantry guys on FOBs right now that internet? They don't have internet. These guys are battling every day. But once again, right? Other people's problems, people don't care about other people's problems until it becomes their problem. And that's very unfortunate, man. If people just had a sense of compassion and humility for others, just once in a while, I'm not saying every day, just once in a while, just try to put yourself in their shoes or in their predicament, it would keep you from complaining about some minutia, some small bullshit.
You're 100% right, because after 9/11 happened, we stopped worrying about the dumb stuff in the Army for a while. And then that dumb stuff just started creeping back in, like, oh, Mr. Santiago, you can't go into the DFAC. You don't have a PT belt. It's daytime. You still got to have it. You know what I'm saying?
Some things I'll never get, even to this day, 20 years later. I still don't get it, man. And I've accepted it's not meant for me to get. So, at what point in flight school did you figure out what airframe you were flying?
I didn't focus on that. When I found out what airframe I was flying was at aircraft selection, and it came down to Chinooks and Blackhawks. We were what they called those lift class, the lift class. The other class, next class was going to be the attack class or whatever. But it was Hawks, so I was like, guess it's Hawks.
Is that what you wanted?
Yeah, I didn't mind that at all. At the end of the day, it was about graduating flight school, not necessarily getting what I wanted, because I'd learned a long time ago, don't focus on what you want, focus on getting the job done first. So I would like, yeah.
I could tell how Ranger Regiment instilled a certain personality in you. And I think that's I would say that's one of the best takeaways that I see just talking to you, you being a friend of mine for so long, that it instilled in you that true sense of selflessness. That, you know, it's not important what Irv wants. What's important is how can I make the team better and we can accomplish this mission and get things done. And I think certain organizations like that, this is why they're so exceptional and what separates them from a lot of other people, because they can teach you that trait that a lot of people are missing and lacking.
Here's the perfect example, personal example that I can think of, that the mission mattered first. So, do you remember Afghanistan when uh when the coffee house was built? Do you remember the two people that started that construction? It was Dennis Elkema and myself. Dennis Elkema and myself started that construction. And then I got put onto the Med Chase, and because of the timing and the date, that I was flying nights, they were doing the construction during the day, all that stuff. So when that coffee shop was done, do you remember what happened with everybody?
No, I'm going to be honest with you, Irv. I was in a place in my life, especially with the Army, being in aviation, I really wasn't around that much. Like I showed up, flew my missions, did the things I had to do. You know, I was involved. I was involved with the company, but I really didn't get involved in big things like that because I felt there was not politics, right? But to me, when looking back at it, to me, I didn't want to have to worry about something else when I had all these other things to worry about. All right. So I wasn't involved in a lot of it, man. I just knew I show up every day and I'm like, damn, you guys are really building this shit. It looks nice. And then I just kept it pushing, did my missions.
So I worked on that thing up until it was about to start the second floor. I did Dennis and I started the base. We got the walls up. Lane Stair was out there helping. And then it was just my turn to go to Met Chase, right? And so sleeping during the day, flying at night. Well, once that coffee house was done, all those guys that worked on it got put in for a volunteer medal. And I did not get one. Even though I was right there with Lane Stair, Dennis Elkman stuff, working on the thing, I didn't get one. And I never said anything to anybody. A couple of people are like, hey, how come you didn't get one? And, staying in that formation, and there was a couple of guys who were like, hey, you worked on that thing too. And I'm like, it doesn't matter. It's done. It is what it is. The medal on my chest doesn't define what I've done. It's the coffee shop. That's the big picture. So that's that mentality of, I'm not worried about me. I'm worried about getting the job done, if that makes sense.
No, it makes a lot of sense. And I feel you on that, man. I'm not sure why those things happen, but
it just is what it is.
Yeah, it is what it is. And I had the same situation happen with me when me, Morgan, Jason Morgan, Josh Powell, and we had another crew chief when we landed on the highway that day to help out those guys that got hit by the IED, right? The entire crew except for me got an ear medal for that. And I was told by leadership, I don't know why I was told by leadership, but that shit left a bad taste in my mouth. And once again, it demonstrated to me poor, ineffective leadership. And the reason I say that is because when you display that teamwork is not important to a team as leaders, you have effectively destroyed your own team.
Absolutely.
Okay. And for that to happen, it was all good. I get it, man. It to this day it still pisses me off. I'm not even gonna exaggerate or lie about it. I'm gonna be very candid about that. For the lack of not even understanding, but for leaders to tout and beat their chest like they're these great leaders, and then they let something like that happen. It was pretty ridiculous to me. And
Unfortunately, there was that. The the thing I try to keep telling myself is it's not about me. It's about the team. It's about the company. It's about the warlords. And even though I was a little bitter, bent out of shape about it, I, I would console myself in like, hey, you know what? The coffee shop is benefiting a bunch of people. Me getting an award only benefits me. What's more important?
sometimes you have to approach life like that, man. It is what it is. I'm not gonna lose sleep or beat myself up over it. We cannot let the poor decision making of other people impact our life to that great extent, because at that point they have control of our life, right?
Absolutely.
And we just have to keep moving forward. Let's rewind real quick. When you left flight school, where'd you go to first?
I went to Fort Campbell and started the warlord, or well, started in the warlords right then.
And what year was that?
It's 2004.
2004. How'd you feel showing up to 101st as a warrant, a W1?
Well, those guys had all just gotten back from a deployment or from the initial war in Iraq. So I had to go back to that same mentality of uh, I wasn't there. Now I gotta work myself into being part of the team. I gotta work myself into being accepted. Um, I got there right as those guys were getting back. In fact, I think I even got there before some of those guys got back. And there was definitely you're not a part of the crowd because you weren't there for it. So that resiliency, that mindset of, you know what, I gotta keep eating it until, I prove myself there.
So they get back around 2004, 2005 timeframe?
It was 2004 because our next deployment was late 2005, 2006.
And you went on that deployment? How was that deployment for you?
That deployment, that was an interesting deployment. The guys, I don't know if guys were bored. Uh, it just seemed like every time we turned around, we were doing stuff that I was like, are we really at war? We built an indoor pool. Can't lie. We pushed guys into the pool for promotions. Um, I got sent off to go do some intel stuff. And I came back. I got to come back in because Josh Knox, our commander at the time, needed to see me. So when I was coming back from Missoula, we stopped in at the base, and I walked in jeans, a t-shirt, and a beard, my rifle, and a pistol. And Josh Knoxum looked at me. He's like, "Can I help you?" And I'm like, "You asked me to come in and sign something." And he's like, his eyes are like, "Why do you have a beard? Why are you in civilian clothes? What is going on?" And I'm like, "Well, you sent me off to go do this, so that's what I'm doing." Um, it was almost comical, the stuff. I got in trouble with everybody in the warlords because you know we would hear these rockets going off and everybody would run outside and go looking for them. And I would tell Joey about, man, we got rocketed again. And Joey hung out with the wives. The next thing I know, Henry Bier and some of these guys are coming on knocking on my door like, hey, stop talking to your wife. Stop telling her what's going on. Because these guys were telling the wives like, nothing's going on. We're bored. We're not flying. We're not doing nothing. Yet this whole time we're flying to places, and you can ask Matt this story, but we go up to a fob and we set the FARP on fire because people forget to shut the flare buckets off. It was crazy.
True Wild West out there.
Yeah, it was crazy.
How long did you do the intel thing?
I did it for 4 months. It was crazy. I worked for Stanley McChrystal. He actually tried to get me to stay, and I was like, no, I'm a brand new W-2. I'm learning to fly. I want to go out here and fly and do stuff. And I met a really good friend of mine, Mike Sabodnik. He was out there. He got wrote in the same thing. He was a guy who had a security clearance, so they roped him into doing some of the intel stuff too. Uh, but it's about everywhere you go, you build these bonds, and the ultimate lowest point in my military career was fast forwarding another deployment. I was I was hanging out with a bunch of guys in the front of our buildings, and we were talking, and I was like, yeah, I was just talking to Mike Sabodnik, and and somebody else asked me where he was at, and I told him because they also knew him, and Matt Cole walked up, and he's like, yeah, I just had this really crappy medevac, and I was like, oh, what happened? He's like, oh, this 58 dude got shot doing a recon. And I'm like, oh, I was like, that sucks. I was like, my buddy Mike Sabodnik is a 58 guy, and Matt's looking at me, and he doesn't even say it. He's like, dude, that was your buddy Mike. So, those bonds we make, they permeate everything, and you never know when they're going to get snapped. So the even if you're someplace for a month, you know what I'm saying, you want to be that guy that people want to be. You want to be that guy that people want to sit there and say, hey, you know what? I'd do anything for that guy. So I guess the big takeaway there is just, what we do really does matter. People we make friends with really does matter.
That first deployment, because we're going to talk about your buddy Mikey, and that first deployment, what was your biggest takeaway from that and your most memorable moment?
My most memorable moment was Shamal had rolled through. It was just dust everywhere. And Matt Cole and I were flying back from doing a mission. And the visibility just sucked. So we called and we're like, hey, we're coming into land at Towers Lake. Roger, not sight. Matt quips right back. He's like, yeah, we don't have you in sight either. Visibility sucks. And it kind of dawned on me, like, man, we could have an accident. This stuff is so bad. And it really started making me think about the missions and stuff that we were doing, and how we were affecting things, where we were going, what we were doing. Yeah, it's kind of the big one right there. And then the takeaway is that, when we do stuff needs to matter. You look at the lives, the time, and everything else spent, and the last thing you want to do is ask yourself, what did I do? What did it matter that I did something? You know what I'm saying? So if you can't make the mission matter, make the people matter.
That's deep.
So Mike Sabodnik, never forget the guy. I still have his phone number in my phone. I still talk to one of his kids, and I haven't emailed his wife in a long time, but that's making him matter.
How busy was that deployment with connectivity and enemy and things like that? That first deployment.
It really wasn't super busy for us on the GSAB side. It was kind of that lull between the initial invasion and then when Al Qaeda and everything really, really spiked up. If that kind of makes sense.
Mm-hmm. No, it makes a lot of sense.
We did a couple big air assaults, and the guys on the ground they were kicking it up with the bad guys a bit, but we really weren't seeing a lot of stuff as far as bad guys getting shot at or anything like that.
All right, Irv. So you get back from that 2005, 2006 deployment. First question: did anything change about you as an individual?
My wife and I've had a lot of discussions about that. She thinks I came back a little more anxious, a little more frustrated, a little bit angrier than she'd ever seen me before in our lives. And I think part of that had to do with, the excitement, the tension over there, and then you come back and it's slower pace, it's a little boring. And then there's the inevitable questions, okay, what did we accomplish? What are we doing over there? We get back, there's the change of commands. The commanders are all gun ho. They want to go get their deployment time in, and they're like, hey, we got some training coming up, and I want you guys to give me 100%. We just got back, and they're already talking, the next deployment 12 months from now. They're talking about a couple JRTCs. They're talking about field problems, and we're like, hey, can we get a little bit of a break, just to spend some time with the families and stuff. And there's a little bit of frustration there, and then it mixed with that duality of also, well, I want to go on the deployment because I want to get that next deployment going because that's what we train for. That's what we want to do. We want to go do our jobs. So there's a lot of emotions there trying to gravitate toward the top and trying to get to be that dominant emotion that you're trying to figure out which one you're dealing with, if that makes sense.
It all makes a lot of sense. They keep us busy, man.
They did.
Real busy.
The one really great thing that kind of sort of happened was Branch kind of came out informally and said, hey, if people don't want to move, we're not going to move people, which really made the warlords kind of what they were, because nobody really left for a long time. We got you guys, we got the new guys in, you, Mike Dollar, Justin Horton, and it was great.
Steve Campbell was another one who
Steve
showed
Campbell.
up. Yeah, I'll never forget that, because I was feeling the same way you felt when you first got to Alpha Company, right? In 2004 was when you first got there. So you do your deployment, and when I got back, and I know me, Horton, Dollar, Steve, we all felt the same way you felt. All you guys are coming back from this deployment real tight. But hell, we just made ourselves at home, and we just started. I came from Sinai, already had some flying time underneath my belt. I was a W-2 already, young W-2. And I just fitted. We just made ourselves. We found a spot in the team, and we had some adversity as a company. And I think that is what brought us all, especially the warrant officers and the enlisted guys, what brought us so close together. We all had a common conflict, I would say, in the company, and that brought us all close together because we're dealing with the same thing. One of the greatest things I've learned in life, and I want to bestow this on everybody out there: when you're going through hard times with other people, it's going to bring your relationship so close.
Absolutely.
And us warlords from 06 to, I'll say, 09 when I left, that team right there, man, we were tight.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, we were tight.
That, and I think, at least for me, I can't sit there and talk about everybody else, but for me, I knew that there was no hazing, weeding out, or whatever. That stayed back in an all-volunteer organization where people could show up and I quit, and the Army gives them orders someplace else. So that was not the kind of mentality that I wanted to have. So I tried to be as welcoming as I could. Was I perfect at it? Probably not. Probably far from it. But the biggest thing for me was like, I didn't want to be exclusionary. I didn't want someone to feel not part of the team because we all had to work together. And that was part of that crew coordination they always talked about and everything.
Were you PC at this time? So how are you feeling knowing that we had first of all, we had to do a lot of training, get all trained up, then go back to Afghanistan. Well, first time for many of us to go to Afghanistan 2008 deployment. How are you feeling as a PC and going into this deployment?
I felt pretty good. I did a lot of research on what was going on in Iraq and what was going on in Afghanistan, talking to buddies in other units and stuff. And I really felt like we were going to go over to Afghanistan to make much more of a difference than what we were doing in Iraq. And I'm not saying Iraq was necessarily a bad thing, you know, but I felt like we were doing more in Afghanistan. And then there was definitely more conflict as far as enemy activity and so forth.
So you show up to Afghanistan. When'd you get there?
I know everybody else most people were pretty much set. I was like the last group of people getting there.
What was your initial reaction when you got to Afghanistan? Coming from being in Iraq, now you're in Afghanistan. What was your first initial thought?
Man, that place was beautiful. The mountains are beautiful. It's one of those things where I just wish people could get past the conflict in their areas, so that way people can appreciate where they're at. Some of those beautiful mountain flying I've ever done. Up to Bamiyan where the Kiwi guys were at. Out into the Pesh, up in the Korgal. Now don't get me wrong, those places gave me the creeps because I knew that it was all bad guys out there. But, absolutely just gorgeous flying.
There were some nice places out there, man. I'll never forget those areas. Bombing especially. There's some very geographically, those are pictures right out of a encyclopedia or something. And get to see it firsthand, but it was something I'll never forget. But like you said, you got a country that's just embedded with chaos, man. It's been like that for decades.
A lot like Iraq, there was so much history. Seeing those minarets on the side of those roads and stuff, and then looking at the history of those things, how long those had been there, was just absolutely amazing.
So much history, man, and get to see it with your own eyes is crazy.
Yeah, absolutely.
Things I'll never forget. This being your second deployment, how was it different from your first deployment?
Let's see. Well, I was a PC, so I was a PC and later as an AMC. I really had to focus more on the team. I noticed before when I was a PI, I kind of had the mentality of I just need to worry about me. I need to make sure that everything I'm doing is great. As a PC, now it was more, hey, I need to look at the team, the crew chiefs. Are they fed? Are they getting rest? How's the maintenance? The guy I'm flying with, is he good? Is he getting experience? Is he getting, it was the biggest frustration on that deployment was the whole green, yellow, red matrix for who could fly. Matt and Gary, got initially tagged together because they were both, high time goggle guys. And then there was myself and a few other people that were like really high yellow and green by the end of the deployment, but that it's so frustrating watching, the junior guys not getting to fly, not getting goggles because of this whole, well, we got to have green, red, and yellow bull crap. And you could see the experience separating and causing a gap in the pilot group. And it just did not feel right, didn't look right.
Yeah, it caused a huge experience gap, man. And it's one of those things, people only get experience. That's another thing we couldn't convey to people. People Some people, when they get in leadership positions, they don't want to listen. It's an example of their poor leadership, but they don't want to listen. They want to do things their way. They're not receptive to feedback, nothing. But I think that experience left a bad taste in a lot of young aviators. And they were trying to get the experience, right? But they were just never given that opportunity. I mean, I was lucky enough to become a PC at the end of that deployment, probably the last three or 4 months of that deployment. But I saw, other guys that they weren't as fortunate, and it's like you just said, it caused. I understand why they did it, right? We have to mitigate the risk. I'm not questioning that at all. I think the way they went about it caused a lot of separation, a lot of indoctrination amongst the team. And I think it caused a lot of problems that if they didn't make the changes they made, it was going to become a real safety issue to a lot of people.
Yeah, I think there was a shift in that mentality of mission to, I don't want to be the chain of command that loses a helicopter. I don't want to be the chain of command that, has someone get hurt. The PT belts were coming hard and fast. They'd already started coming out in Iraq. And then, the road that goes around the fob there, they started closing the road so they could do runs and stuff. I'm like, what is going on? We're losing the focus of the war effort for some kind of garrison environment, and I think when that really started to permeate out of the chain of command, out to the units and stuff like that, people stopped taking stuff serious. And that's why on the next deployment, that's why we started having accidents. There was a lack of experience. There was a lack of taking stuff serious. It's one thing to sit there and wonder, are we accomplishing something? Are we doing something that's going to be meaningful 10 years down the road? Or is this a flying club and we're just out here having fun?
We're not even having fun. Just, I'm going to help my buddy get as much flight time and experiences.
Yeah, that's the flying club mentality.
Yeah, that flying club mentality was egregious, man. Shit. What was your biggest takeaway from that 2008 deployment?
The biggest takeaway from that deployment was probably Mike's death. And that before Mike, I only lost 2 other friends in combat. The Mike's death was the closest because I was actually I was on the same deployment with him right there when it happened. And that was that, hey, you know what? We're not guaranteed stuff. People would sit there and joke about, hey, we're going to go out and fly this ring route. And they would sit in the S2 briefs and they would smoke and joke and not really care. And, nothing seemed farther away from combat. I remember getting we got a main transmission ship light, and the guy I was flying was like, oh, we need to land. And I'm like, what? No, we're not landing. We're going to the nearest fob to land. And he's like, no, the book says land as soon as possible. And I'm like, dude, do you not know what's out here? He's like, we landed. We can't get off the ground. Who knows what's going to happen? And, that because that mindset had permeated all the way down to the guy sitting next to me, it started to make me really wonder what we were doing. And because of that, it made me want to make sure that the bonds I was creating with people were as strong as possible. Because the last thing I wanted was, somebody to go set the helicopter down someplace and then, oh, it's not a big deal. It's a joke thing, whatever, blah, blah, blah. And then next thing you know, something bad happens to them.
And I think that's where experience comes into play. Even me as a PC, main transmission, I'm not landing in an arbitrary place in Afghanistan, bro.
Nope.
If my rotor's not being drooped, if I'm not losing RPM tomorrow, we're still flying, we're going to get somewhere safe. All right. I don't give two fucks what the book says. Okay. I'm going to tell you how I feel about my life and your life and everybody else's life around us, and what happens if we do land this in willy-nilly anywhere in Afghanistan. We're going to have more problems than a damn chip light.
Yep.
Okay. But that just displays, I think, people's inexperience. And I think some people get so caught up in the by the book that they forget that as you learn things, sometimes we may have some situations will require you to deviate from the book.
Yep, absolutely.
It's called real life, man. And I think a lot of people had a hard distinction of figuring that out. But in their defense, you only figured those things out with experience, right?
Yeah, and that's just it. We weren't flying everybody enough where people could get that experience. The guy I was flying with, he was one of those guys that was, you know, he didn't have any goggle time. So did they let him fly at night? No. You know, maybe he might get a training flight with me, or he might get a training flight with somebody, but so what? He got 10 hours of goggles. What does that matter? You know, when guys are out there flying 50, 60, 70 hours of goggles in a month. You know, that's the kind of experience everybody needed, not just a few people.
That's a lot of damn goggle hours in a month. Well, relatively, right? There's some units that all they do is fly at night.
All right. That was my next deployment.
So let's talk about the day your buddy Mike passed away. Where was he in Afghanistan, and what exactly happened?
So he was down at Jalalabad, and they were up in the next valley over from us in Bagram. Mixed it up with bad guys. He took a round through the leg, and by the time they could get him medevac, he had passed away. He bled out. So Dave Draper was really hopeful. I got to go to that memorial service that they held at Jalalabad for him. Dave Draper told the chain of command, he's like, "Hey, Irv needs to go down there." That was one of his best friends. So, you know, we did a two-shipper down there. Got to do the memorial service, sit there, you know, say goodbyes and stuff like that. Then shortly after that, they had the fob that got overran. And that was Gary Simmons and I flew a couple helicopters, and we carried back all the KIA from that. So that was a lot to deal with in a very, very short period of time. Probably the thing that got me through all that was people like Matt, Gary, Dave, you know, all the guys, all the warlords that, you know, were able to sit back and have those bonds with to do stuff. And I think it was shortly after that I got shipped over to medevac because I'd been doing the QRF stuff. So going over to the medevac and kind of getting away from stuff and not seeing the fights and the firefights and all that stuff kind of made things a little more relaxing because, you know, now it was just doing med chase every night.
What was the biggest difference between this deployment? This is your third deployment to the other two?
This one had more of the feel of the war. You know, that's there was the Chinook that hit the trees up in the Cornwall. There was definitely there was the mentality among us down at the warlords. Hey, there's real stuff going on, and then we had this other battle with leadership that just seemed like there was not that same focus. And I remember we were going out to do take some Pathfinders out, and the mission got nixed. And the Pathfinders were like, "We don't understand why." And the chain of command came down. They're like, "Well, you know, we're 8 months into the deployment. We don't want to lose anybody." And the Pathfinders are like, "That's our job. We're supposed to go out there and do this stuff." And the it just it just reeked of a flying club. Like, we're just here to have fun. We're here to build some hours. And if we can find, if the right people on the right mission could get a medal out of it, even better. Don't worry about anybody else. You know what I'm saying? But it was a very war feeling, but the chain of command tried to wrap it up as it just didn't want it to feel like that. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I remember I flew a lot out that 2008 deployment and going out to, the Korengal all the time and all those areas out there and seeing how the infantry guys were living. Then we get to come back, and I think a lot of people were disconnected with the realities of what was really going on. Once again, right? Other people's problems are not my problems, so I'm not going to worry about it. And that's how people deal with things. 2008, man, a lot of good flying out there. And there was a situation I had one day at the talk, and an individual, certain leadership were hell bent on doing something that was so trivial. And as I was at this point, I was about a mid grade, low level senior W2. Been flying quite a bit out there, and I said something 'cause I just couldn't take it anymore. I was just like, what in the fuck are we doing? And you guys know me. I didn't say much, but when I said shit, I stayed to myself a lot. I stayed quiet. I learned from all you guys. But this one day I'll never forget. I had to say something. I got my ass chewed for it, and I was okay with it. But I got my point across. But I appreciate all the senior guys like Dave Draper, Henry, you, Matt, all you guys, Gary. You guys taught me a lot. You taught me a lot about aviation. And hell, this is why by the end of that deployment, I did make PC because I listened to all you guys. I watched how you did things, Jason Morgan. And the best thing about the Warlords during that time, with all that stuff going on, we still held together as a bond, especially the warrant officers. The Dennis Elkema's another one. We held together as a bond. We got the mission done. And I would say as a company, we're pretty good at what we did.
Yeah, that was probably one of our most trying deployments right there.
I think that's where I became the good aviator that I was. Just a lot of that. Dave Draper especially. I flew with Dave a lot. And Eddie. Dave Draper, man, he would push that aircraft. I've never seen that aircraft push that to that level. But I was learning the entire time. He's teaching me this stuff as a young aviator. I'm like, holy shit, man. And it pushed my comfort level higher, but kept me safe as well.
Yeah, you can't expand your envelope if you don't go to the edge.
Besides Mike passing away, what was your most memorable moment during 2008?
It was probably when I was doing the LOA flights for the guys replacing us. If you remember, we had 6th Bat and 7th Bat. 7th Bat was replacing us, and just taking their guys out doing the LOA flights. It just seemed like a big breath of fresh air because their chain of command just seemed like it just had a slightly different focus than ours. But taking these guys out and they're seeing these mountains and stuff for the first time and stuff, just made me wonder what we look like brand new to Afghanistan, seeing these mountains and stuff. And I remember I had a couple of the pilots in the back, and we were at Asadabad. Remember that little triangle base? Anyway, what's that?
I sound very familiar with Asadabad.
So I asked them, I said, what altitude do you guys think we're at sitting here on the ground? And they were like, oh, there's the river. We're probably, 300, 400, 500 feet or something. I was like, nah, dude, we're at like 6,000 feet sitting on the pad. And they were just like, holy crap. Just getting people to realize that we were up in the mountains, not just even up in the mountains, in the valley floors when we're still up in the mountains. You know, Gardez was 7,500 feet sitting on that ground there. So seeing these guys as they're taking it in, it's almost like seeing like a brand new pilot as he's learning new stuff. So seeing these guys absorb this stuff was kind of a really good feeling. It kind of made me decide to go and want to be an instructor.
I want to talk about that mission you and Gary did, because that was a very important day, I think, in American history. And I would just like to hear your take on it and the sequence of events that when you guys were called to go pick up all the killed in action, the soldiers, because I can't remember what the name of that fob was. Was it Blessing or Bella?
It was golly, I'm trying to remember the name of it now.
Yeah, I can't remember. But if you could talk about that day real quickly, just so, because I really never heard the details or just how it went down, because once again, I wasn't the high time guy, so I had to stay back at Bagram and in the talk and try to pay attention as everything unfolded. But I'd like to hear your take on it.
So Gary had ship 2, I had ship 1, and they initially launched us to take guys up to the fob to reinforce the guys in the combat there. And
could you tell us what was happening for you to go?
okay, so
Do you know?
so we were on QRF, and it came over the radio that there was a pretty good fight going on up in the Korengal Valley, and they called the QRF in to be ready to provide assistance. And then it changed to, hey, they're under heavy contact, and they're talking about sending additional people from Jalalabad up to reinforce the place. So then we were put on alert to be ready to take guys. At first, it was going to be the Pathfinders, and then I guess somebody overrode that to make it some of the brigade that it was the same brigade that had that fob up there as well as Jalalabad. And I guess that brigade commander's like, no, I'm taking my guys up there to reinforce his own guys. I think the Pathfinder thing piece of it came from the whole, well, we want to punch our ticket by putting our guys into the fight and stuff. And you know what I'm saying? That always trying to look to see how they could somebody could get their medal out of things. So once the Pathfinders were next, they went ahead and launched us to Jalalabad to go pick up guys. And this has probably been 6 to 8 hours after the whole thing started. We landed there, and they said, hey, the fob had been overrun, and there was mass casualties. I talked to a buddy of mine, Jimmy Morrow, and he had been up there doing gun runs the entire day, and they got back and they said, hey, there's other Apaches up there. They're still pulling security, but it was really bad. So Gary and I were sitting at Jalalabad, rotors turning, just waiting to find out what's going to go on. And then they tasked us to go up there and get casualties. Well, we sat there waiting for our escort, and then it changed to, hey, now we got some other Blackhawks to go from Asadabad up to that fob and get the casualties. They're going to bring them back, and they're going to cross-load them onto our aircraft to fly back to Bagram. I don't think any of us had flown more than one hero flight. I don't think any of us had flown more than one hero in a flight prior to that. And now we had, a whole bunch. Usually it was, one guy and a couple escorts. Now we had so many that, my aircraft was completely full. Gary's aircraft was full. When they moved us over to pick these guys up, they're coming in on the left-hand side of the aircraft, and I told the crew chiefs, hey, go out there, render the salutes. Gary did the same thing. But, these guys are bringing these kids up, and all of them, everybody's got tears just screaming out because this is not something that happens. So we sat there for probably a good while. It was a long time because they brought each person up individually. And then when we finally launched, I told Gary, I was like, hey, that bomber's not going to be expecting this. They're used to, getting one or two. I said, so we need to call back. And so we started coordinating this. We're like, hey, we don't need the receiving detail to come out in just a couple people. Like, we need a lot of people. So Gary and I land at Bagram, and these jackasses come out. There's like 3 of them. I'm like, dude, what are you guys doing? Like, we got 11 kids in the back of the helicopter, and they're showing up, and they got these little gurneys things, and we're like, what are you guys doing? So we sat there for probably another 45 minutes as they're sitting there trying to untangle this goat rope and keep it respectful and all this. You know what I'm saying? Quietest flight I'd ever been on, because I looked in the back and I'd never seen so many body bags in my life. And then we go back, shut down, and nobody wants to talk. So I remember talking to the crew chief. So I'm like, hey guys, you guys good? How you guys feeling? And, it was just demoralizing. So I was like, hey, look, we're not going to do this, but we're going to go do this. I know where to get something. Everybody can have a drink, and just nobody's getting out of control. So we all go back. We break out a few refreshments, and both crews, we go back, shut the door. Everybody has a couple shots, and we all go to bed. And I think that's probably all that was ever said about that whole thing. But that was a long day for Gary and I, because things just kept changing, and every time it changed, it just got worse. And we're sitting there just listening to it get worse and worse and worse over the radios. That actually is what made me start thinking about possibly switching over to the Apache, because I was tired of sitting on the sideline.
Yeah. It is a very hopeless feeling, listening to the radios when things are going on and you can't do nothing about it. It's a tough situation to be in. What's your biggest takeaway from that 2008 deployment?
2008 deployment, life was short. Stuff was happening, and you didn't know what was going to happen the next day. Not promised. So try to go out and, give your friends hugs. Give your friends the high fives, talk to your crew chiefs, and, don't leave. Don't take off the ground with something bad happening. Fix it or don't fly. So, and that was, and you'll kind of remember what I'm talking about. There was a little bit of strain even in the warrant officers because of what was going on. So a lot of us were trying to make sure that, we were fixing things without leaving things bad. You know what I'm saying? We were all trying to make sure that everybody was good.
You get back from that deployment. At that point, did you realize that this deployment did have an effect on you and change you?
Yeah, this deployment did. I was going way back toward the my battalion mentality of wanting to do things, wanting to affect things, wanting to help people. And I couldn't see myself doing that in the Blackhawk. So if I'd have been afforded the opportunity to go to the instructor course in the Blackhawk and been busy doing that, maybe that would have changed things. I don't know. I really enjoyed working with all the instructor pilots. So I saw myself going that route. Then when the Apache program presented itself, I jumped on that with both hands and kind of got that revived sense of, hey, you know what? I'm going to go out there and make a difference again.
So how did that happen? You transitioning from a Blackhawk pilot to an Apache pilot?
So the brigade commander wanted, he offered some senior or mid-grade seniors warrants. He's like, hey, I'll support anybody who wants to make the change. So I put the paperwork in, didn't know what was going to happen. I was told I wasn't going to get to go to the IP course. So I was like, I'll try this route. And I got a call on a Thursday asking if I could be at Fort Rucker to start on the flight line Monday morning. And I'm like, I don't even have orders. And they're like, we're emailing you the orders right now. Just do everything you need to do on a Friday. And I'm like, holy crap. I'm like, all right, whatever. No stress there. No stress there at all. I get a call from Fort Rucker from the IPs down there. They're like, hey, we just got word that you're coming down on Monday. They're like, hey, they're like, just so you know, you're not cutting you any slack. You got a 5 and 9 Monday morning, along with everybody else, and then at the flight line
For the Apaches?
for the Apache.
Shit.
So
you're supposed to memorize all that shit in a weekend, and you got to drive half the weekend down there.
So, well, not only that, I had to fly my mom out to watch my girls because Joey was deployed. So my mom gets out there Saturday. I leave Sunday morning to get to Fort Rucker. I go to Wings. I buy the 5 and 9, and I study all Sunday night on the 5 and 9 test. And I passed that sucker Monday morning. Could not believe it. I was like, you gotta be kidding me. And then 4.5 months later, I finished the course as the honor graduate. And the brigade commanders came down for the graduation. He's like, honor graduate. He's like, what do you want to do? And I was like, I want to go back to Fort Campbell. I know the next deployment is. And if I tell the Army I'll go anywhere, I'll be on a deployment in like 6 weeks. So I go back to Fort Campbell and I meet the company. I get assigned to the company that when we go on deployments, they're the same company that's part of our task force with our. So I already know some of these guys. I know Jimmy Morrow, and I know, Mike Nelson, and I know McCormick, and it's like almost like going into like a second little family because these are all guys we work with already. So I get there, and I remember meeting Jimmy Morrow in his office, and I'm like, hey, Jimmy, I'm here to be one of your new Apache guys, and I'm thinking to myself, I'm going to have the greatest time of my life. I'm like, I'm already a senior guy. I already got a ton of hours. I know how to fly. And Jimmy looks at me, he's like, hey man, you don't think you're going to kick back and relax, do you? And I'm like, maybe. He's like, well, tell you what. He's like, look, here is the plan for you. He's like, you're going to RO progress in the front seat. You're going to go to gunnery. You're going to RO progress in the back seat. You're going to go back to gunnery. Then they're going to make you a PC for the deployment. And I'm like, what? I'm like, what? I'm like, no, dude. I'm like, dude, usually you guys don't let a guy go from the front seat to the back seat till they got a deployment under their belt. And he's like, yeah. He's like, you're not getting that option. So I do RO progression front seat, gunnery, RO progression back seat, gunnery, and then a PC check ride, all before the next deployment.
Damn.
Yeah.
How many months was that?
That was probably 4 months. It was fast.
Now help me because I'm uneducated. What is the difference between the front seat and the back seat of an Apache?
So the front seat is the gunner station. He can fly the airplane or he can fly the helicopter, no problem. But he's also got the target acquisition and designation device up front. So he's got the big camera on the bottom of the Apache. He can zoom in. He can use the laser, fire all the weapons and stuff. In the back seat, you can fire the rockets, you can fire the 30 millimeter cannon and stuff, but you don't have the ability to zoom in on a target. You can't shoot the laser or anything. Um, you're kind of like the manager of the aircraft. You're going to be the AMC. You're going to tell the guy in the front seat. You got two video screens. One will have the aircraft systems. The other is going to have his camera on it, so you can see what he's shooting at. And he's going to verify you, and you're going to sit there and say, "Hey, you're clear to shoot." That kind of stuff. It's usually the more senior person as well. So yeah, I RL progress and I end up in the back seat about as fast as you can do. And the other thing about sitting in the front or in the back seat is because you're usually the senior person, one of the things you have to be able to do is talk the front seater how to do an engagement. So you're telling him where to put his fingers, what buttons to push. You basically have the entire front memorized. So if he can't figure out why the laser's just bobbing back and forth, you're like, hey, okay, put your hand on the right grip. Your thumb should be on a coolie hat switch. From that switch, move to your right, move up, and you need to take it out of automatic to manual mode. Little stuff like that, because stuff happens. Guys can't figure out why something's working or not working. So the first guy that I fly with in the Apache is McCormick. He's the last guy when I retire out of the Army that I fly with in the Apache. Same guy. Super great guy. Loved him to death.
Let me ask you, how hard was it making that transition from Blackhawk to Apache?
Had the flying down, had the instrument stuff down. The biggest thing I had to do was learn weapon systems and engagements. That was the hard part. It's kind of like a Blackhawk guy going to an Echo model and having to learn the whole new systems. So it wasn't terribly hard. It was just a lot of knowledge. But I kind of had a new fire. I was like, okay, I'm going to go out and directly help the guys on the ground. So I had a new, I don't want to say lease on life, but I had a new motivation. So, when I went in there and they started talking about rockets or whatever, I wanted to know everything and anything I could to be able to accurately get a rocket where I wanted. Same thing with the guns, the missiles, all that stuff.
Now, when you made this decision to become an Apache guy, I know it didn't matter because Brigade said, did you get full support and backing from the company and battalion level? Did people treat you differently because you wanted to become an Apache guy? How did that work out?
That was, thankfully I already got my OER, my latest OER. So, but there was a little bit of pushback on that from the battalion level, because once again, now all of a sudden they're losing a high time guy. But I also fired right back at him. I'm like, well, nothing against the person that got it, but I was like, you guys took a maintenance guy and you're sending him to the IP course, and I said, I got my W3 board, and everything's lined up because I don't want to go to the W3 board as an untracked W3, so I need the IP course. And they're like, well, this person got it. I'm like, he's already tracked. He's already been promoted. Why not send a guy who, give me a legit reason. If they'd have been like, oh, you suck or whatever, you know what I'm saying? I could have lived with that, but not that. None of the answers were, how those guys were. You didn't get good answers.
I think that's another issue. When you don't clearly communicate as a leader to the people you're leading, it leaves things up to interpretation, and that's when you start thinking bad things, right? Start questioning, is it me? Start doubting yourself, and all this other things start building when people should just be honest, be candid. We're big boys. We're big girls here. We could take the truth. No matter how much you believe we can't, we could take the truth. Just tell us. Like, we have that right to know, to tell us.
So I had heard about it on the last deployment. I'd heard I heard the rumblings from the junior guys. I'd seen your example where everybody on the crew got the air medal, but you. And I tried to sit back and say, okay, you know what? I'm not seeing everything. There can't be favoritism stuff going on. There just can't be. You know what I'm saying? But then after after that happened to me, I'm like, well, maybe there is this stuff going on. And I'm like, I never could get an answer on that. And I started looking at the people that stuff happened for, and then people that stuff didn't happen for. And then I asked myself, I was like, well, when they gave out all those awards for building the coffee shop, I'm asking myself this question. I'm like, did I not get an award because I wasn't part of the crowd? And I thought about going to Hal, and I thought about going to Sam and asking them these questions. But, it went against my grain of what's more important, me or the mission, me or the warlords, So I was like, if, let me just go back to taking control of my path again. So I was like, if I can take the Apache course, I'll take the Apache course.
So you become an Apache pilot. You smoke a flight school down there, honor grad. You get back to Fort Campbell. How soon do you find yourself in a deployment? In what year?
That was 2009, 2010, or 2010, 2011.
I think it's 2010, 2011.
Yeah, that's when we were south in Kandahar and stuff.
Now, getting to Kandahar, getting down to that deployment, how was that compared to 2008? And what was the biggest difference besides the obvious? You have the potential to crush everybody with your aircraft now. What was the difference between being in the Blackhawks and Apaches in a combat zone?
So the big difference was there was the mindset of we're going to go out and start smoking people. There was the mindset of, hey, we're here to go out and do stuff. So how can we get bad guys? It wasn't a question of, hey, we're going to fly the ring route. And I'm not knocking that. Don't take that. And I hope anybody who watches doesn't take that the wrong way. Ring route stuff had to happen. That was the mission. The Apache mission was like, okay, how can we go get bad guys? So, they would sit down, they'd pull the crews in, and they're like, hey, here's the AO. Here's historically where bad guys are at. Why are the bad guys here? Where are the bad guys going to be? Where are the bad guys going to go? And we started thinking about how to do stuff to get the bad guys. Like, so we were down there on the Mustang ramp, right? Remember that? And
I wasn't in 2000. I didn't go on that deployment 2010 deployment.
So we were down we were separate from the main runway on a different ramp called Mustang ramp. We would take off out of Mustang ramp and do like a 2-foot hover down to the departure end of the runway. Because if you remember how the fast mover guys would take off, they'd come down the end of the runway on afterburner, they'd take off straight up. So we would do stuff like we'd sneak down to the end of the runway, no lights on at all, waiting for those guys to take off because we knew when they were going to go because we'd coordinate with them. And those guys would come blasting over us with their afterburner on, and then we would fly off into the desert, down to the south, down to the Red Desert. And I remember we were flying through this valley one night, and we were checking in with the battle space guys, and this kid comes on the radio and he's like, hey, we're like, hey, you got 2 Apaches, 600 rounds, 4 missiles, 36 rockets. What do you got going on? And the kid was like, nothing. We're sleeping at night because the bad guys know you're out there. It's such a good feeling though. And then fucking 6 months later, we fucking crashed a Blackhawk on the side of a mountain, killing Josh Pep. Sitting there watching that shit happen.
You were providing air cover for that mission? Dang.
Yep, I was in one aircraft. Jason McCormick was in the other aircraft. Freaking watched that shit. Well, I didn't watch it happen. I was on a different orbit, but Jason's like, he's like, dude, he's like, got an aircraft down. Fucking swung over and some freaking aircraft, like a fucking life-size jigsaw puzzle out there.
Damn. You knowing Josh and you being on the scene, what was your first reaction? How'd you feel? And what'd you want to do out there?
Yeah, I just wanted to kill people, man. It's just, you know, I've talked to Matt Cole about this, and I didn't watch Matt's podcast because I wanted to not have any influence on anything I said today. But Matt and I talked about the debt detachment, which was basically like it was like our task force's 160th light, wannabe, whatever. You know, there were guys on that detachment that had no business. They were too junior. It was like the green, yellow, red thing didn't exist for them. They were out there just doing missions and stuff that didn't need to happen. The crew mixes were way off from what they should have been. Not saying I'm a proponent for, green crews, yellow crews, red crews, and all that stuff, but the it was just a shame that it happened. So once again, yin to the yang. I was kind of back to where I was really enjoying things, and then I'm back to where, crap, I can't affect things again.
Yeah. I think that realization that you can't do anything is a very crippling feeling.
Yep. And then a few months later, freaking, they try to kill us because there's a freaking Humvee hit a mine or something, and there's a kid out there that I got it. The kid's in trouble. He's in bad shape, but the chain of command makes this promise of, you get me the doctors to the aircraft, I will get the aircraft to the person, and the visibility sucks. So they don't launch med chase. You know what they do? They launch an Apache for the med helicopter to follow, because we got the FLIR, so we can kind of sort of see a little bit better. Not much, but it's nighttime. The weather's crap, and Jason McCormick and I get shoved into this because they're like, get Swerve. He has tons of instrument time. Get Jason McCormick. He's an IP. Those two guys can get this thing done. So we take and we lead this medevac aircraft out with a couple of doctors. They're like the surgeon guys, like not the medics or anything like that, like the legit doctors. And we lead this medevac helicopter out like 4 or 5 miles from Kandahar at like a half a rotor disc to this accident. And we get out there, the doctors, they get this kid stabilized, they get him into the back of the aircraft, and they're like, okay, now we got to get back. And, to give you an idea of how bad the weather was, you need 500 meters for the laser to be able to launch out and return to be able to get an accurate range, right? We couldn't even use the laser. That's how bad the weather was. So we do this. We fly this aircraft back. And I honestly don't know if the kid made it or not, because the thing that I was just so pissed about was, I'm not saying that kid's life was not important. I'm not saying that. But what if we'd have crashed? What if we'd have mixed blades on 2 other helicopters? You'd have killed 2 more doctors. You'd have killed 2 flight crews. You know what I'm saying? All because, the chain of command is like, I can do this. And, how many times we talked about, the risk versus the reward thing, and don't get me wrong, I was the first guy who would sit there and say, "Hey, there's a tick. I'll go. Let's go." But it doesn't do the guys on the ground any good if that doctor's dead and now can't save the next guy.
What was your biggest takeaway from that deployment, being an Apache guy, and this being your last deployment?
So I knew I wanted it to be my last deployment because I truly believed Garrison had broke out. And my biggest takeaway from this was near the end of the deployment. Never going to forget this. This is the funniest thing that's ever happened to me on a deployment. We go out and we're supporting a night insertion for some guys. And we have to fire these Illum rockets. They're IR Illum rockets, so you can only see them under goggles. So Jason goes and he fires off a couple of Illum rockets, and I follow behind him and I shoot off a couple of Illum rockets. And Jason comes back out of the radio. He's like, "Hey," he's like, "what kind of rockets did you fire?" And I'm like, "I fired Illum rockets. That's all I got. It's the only Illum rockets I got." And I'm like, "Why?" And he's like, "Dude, I'm looking at the rockets." He's like, "They're all 4 super bright." And I tilt my head under the goggles, and I'm like, "Holy crap! We didn't fire Illums. We fired regular. We fired regular Illum rockets." So we go back to the fob, and we're like, we go to the 3-5 guys who handle all the ammo, and we're like, "What the hell, dudes? Where's the Illum rockets at? Why are the Illum rockets? Why do we have these? We know we specifically told you guys what we needed." And this kid started explaining what happened. So they were having an inspection, and they got dinged on the rockets all being scuffed up because if you don't shoot the rockets, they'll take them out of the tubes, back in the packaging and everything else, right? So they got dinged on the inspection because the Illum rockets were all scuffed up from sliding in and out of the launch tubes. So because they got dinged on the inspection, some asshole comes down and says, "We need to paint the rockets and make them look good." So they spray painted all the Illum rockets. They didn't separate them for IR Illum or normal Illum. They just took all the IR rockets. Some PFC probably was told, "Hey, paint all the Illum rockets." So they spray painted all the Illum rockets because of an inspection, and they got dinged because the rockets were scuffed up.
And since they spray painted them, they couldn't tell the difference.
Exactly.
Jesus Christ, man.
So we're sitting there looking at this, and we're like, "What the hell?" And yeah, funniest thing I'd ever seen. It was ridiculous.
So when you got back, did you submit what happened when you got back from that deployment?
When I got back from that,
Where'd you go
when
next?
I got back from that deployment, the 64 branch manager called me up and was like, "Hey," he's like, "you got 2 choices." He's like, "You can stay there, or I need someone to go to Fort Rucker and be an IP." He's like, "I talked to Jimmy Morrow, who was the senior IP at the company I was in, and he said you would make an amazing instructor pilot." Because when I was as a 64 guy, I got tasked with doing a lot of the teaching instrument stuff, courtesy stuff for the guys and everything. And then when we got to Afghanistan, Jimmy asked me to help with building some instrument approaches, some GPS approaches to some of the FOBs like Ramrod, and, Wilson, and stuff like that. So in case guys got stuck in some bad weather, we could recover somehow. Very, very absolutely as unofficial as hell as you can get. But in the event that it might save someone's life, they wanted something. So I got tasked with going to Fort Rucker. I got PCS to Fort Rucker and became an IP down there. And I did that for about 18 months and maybe almost 2 years-ish before I retired, because I did not want to go back out. And it's not that I didn't want to go back out because I didn't want to fight or whatever. It's that I was I was listening to the stuff that was happening. I heard about the ROE changes. I heard about how if a bad guy has a weapon and he shoots and he drops his weapon, he's now considered a non-combatant. I was hearing all this stuff, and I was like, I don't know if I want to do this. I got investigated for one shooting in Afghanistan, and it I'm not gonna lie, it scared the crap out of me for a little bit. But what made me even more nervous was the fact that I got investigated, they were looking to hang somebody, and the circumstance was we'd found this guy who was putting an IED in the road, and what he would do is he would show up, he'd dig out some dirt, and then he would ride off on his motorcycle. And then he'd come back and, nothing had happened. He'd dig some more dirt out. And then he came back, and once the hole was enough, he came back and he'd drop that. He just kind of flung the IED out off to the side of the road. He just kind of kept going. And as long as nothing happened, he'd come back and then he'd bury the IED and everything. Well, we had this all on video. And then the battle space commander's like, yep. He's like, IED's in. He's like, we're going to send somebody out to get the IED. He's like, but smoke the guy on the motorcycle. So we circled around, we shot a Hellfire, and we killed the guy. Now, when it came to engagements, we had to submit 30 seconds before to 30 seconds after we had shot a guy. So what was not on that 30 seconds? All the stuff he'd been doing all day long, or actually was all night long, right? So all the higher headquarters got, and I'm talking like up at like the senior headquarters, up above brigade, all they got was 30 seconds of a guy riding a motorcycle and killed. So they send down the investigators, and they're like, hey, we're going to read you your rights and all this other stuff. We're like, for what? And they're like, well, we have this tape. This guy didn't have a weapon, didn't have nothing, and you guys just shot him. We're like, whoa, like, wait a minute. We have all these tapes. We kept all the tapes for everything. We're like, here's the whole tape. Here's 6 hours of what this guy was doing. But there was no, hey, what happened? Or, hey, we need to figure out what's going on here. It was, you guys are in trouble. You guys killed this guy, and now you're going to go to jail. Or whatever, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. That whole thing of you're guilty until proven innocent.
That's exactly what it was. There was no, they automatically assumed we were guilty.
Damn.
So,
that's tough.
So with
man.
all that going on, I'm like, all the ROE changes. I'm sure you heard about some of the ROE changes and stuff. So I was like, I don't want to go back over. The war's over. There's some people still out there doing good stuff, but it's few and far between. So going to Rucker, Jason McCormick followed me down to Fort Rucker, and he and we both talked about retiring. We both made our plans. He made a sweetheart deal with HR to go to Korea and come back and do 3 more years at Rucker, and he decided to do that. And I'm like, dude, you're crazy. Just retire. So I retired, and I'd been out for 3 years when Sadie called me, and Jason had flew into wires and crashed.
Damn.
So the guy I flew with, my very first Apache ride, and the guy.
Hold on real quick, Irv. Let's backtrack real quick. Hold that thought, okay? When you got back from that last deployment, how are you feeling mentally?
Mentally, I felt good about what we were trying to accomplish, but I was getting beat down by the chain of commands, by the ROE changes, the kind of the overall situation. People were tired of the war, and now they were just looking to, here's a problem. They didn't want to solve it. They just wanted to bitch about stuff.
You get down to Rucker. Now you're an IP. Jason gets down there with you. You decide, you know what? I'm not going to take W4, right? I'm going to go ahead and retire. Jason decides to stay in. And then you get that phone call from who?
From Sadie, his wife.
Oh, and can you tell us what happened?
So she called me up, and at first I did not understand anything she was saying. She was just like, you guys were supposed to retire. You guys were supposed to be done with this stuff. And I'm like, Sadie, slow down. What's up? And She's like, Jason crashed. And I'm like, what the fuck are you talking about? And she's like, Jason crashed. He ran into wires. And I'm like, I freaking can't believe this. I'm like, you gotta be shitting me. And she's like, yep. She's like, they just told me. She's like, they're still sitting here at the house. She's like, the kids are still in school. She's like, kids haven't got home yet.
And where did he hit wires at?
Korea.
In Korea?
In fact, if you remember 2000, I think it was 2017, there was 4 accidents. In fact, they killed a couple warlords, and one of them over at Hood.
Yep.
You know what I'm talking about?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So remember, there was 4 accidents, all within like 6 weeks.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Jason was one of those. There's the other Apache at Campbell that hit the tower.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's the 2 Blackhawks.
Damn. So what did the investigation find out from his accident?
Pilot error. They flew into wires.
He just didn't see him. This is nighttime, obviously.
Yeah, it was nighttime. They were going from one range to another range, and they flew into some.
Damn. Damn. Were you out the army or in the army when you got this news?
I was out of the army. I'd retired. That's where Sadie was crying because Jason and I, we got back from the deployment, going to Rucker. We're like, we're done. We're retiring. When it's time to PCS, we're retiring. We're not doing anything else.
How did that loss impact you as a civilian? I know he was, just you talking about him, I know he was a good friend of yours. How did you handle that, and how did that impact you?
That was really rough, especially because of the other accidents, and I knew all these people. You know, you get out of the military and you're like, I'm not gonna have to think about that stuff anymore. I'm not gonna. You for some reason you just check it out, and you're like, I'm not gonna have to worry about accidents anymore. You know what I'm saying? And then to have all those crashes, you remember Steve Blass? Yeah, he was the helicopter. He was in the helicopter that went inverted in Afghanistan. You sit there and you start thinking about these guys, and you're like, you know, you ever see Band of Brothers? Remember the last episode where they said the war was over, but people were still dying? It was kind of the same thing. It's a very surreal thing. You're like, I'm done. I've hung up that hat, but you still hear about friends. Stuff's still happening. We just did a funeral for Stacy Culp, and Matt and Gary and I were talking, and one of the things that has been kind of nice is that we've all started getting to the point that we've been out of the military long enough that when we hear about these accidents, as tragic as it is, we're not connected to them as much anymore because we don't know the people. Now, I'm not going to lie. If I saw an accident from 6-101, I don't care if I never knew the guys at all.
Yeah. And that just happened last year with the medevac.
Yep.
When they had that midair, that one hit me hard, man. And I didn't even know about it. I had my phone was blowing up. Like my family, friend, my phone was blowing up, and I looked at it. And then when I realized it, I just started making phone calls because I still have friends that are in the Army right now flying. Just only maybe 1 or 2 left. But still, it's like you said, man. When you're connected to something or an organization, it still hits home pretty closely.
It sure does.
So you leave the Army. How did Joey felt when you told her you're leaving?
She was good. So she had PCS down at Fort Rucker as well. She was ready for one of us to finally hang the hat up. She was getting close herself. She was trying to figure out if she was going to stay for major or not. She ended up deciding to retire a year after I did. It was a good feeling, and it's funny. So the dumb stuff still didn't quit. So if anybody who's been to Fort Rucker knows that they have their stupid PT policy, when it's PT time, you're supposed to be in uniform and all this other stuff, right? So Joey's still in the Army. I get a retired ID card and I get a dependent ID card. And since I just retired, I was still going to the gym. I go to the gym on Fort Rucker and I'm on the I'm not the treadmill, I'm on the elliptical and I'm just pedaling away, all happy, right? And this guy taps me on my shoulder. And he's like, and I'm like, go away, I got my headphones in. So he reaches up and he pulls the emergency stop on the elliptical. And I'm like, what the hell, dude? And he's like, I need your ID card. And I'm like, who the hell are you? He's like, I'm the courtesy patrol. And he's like, you're not in uniform. And, according to the regulations, you're supposed, Fort Rucker thing, you're supposed to be in uniform during PT hours. And I'm like, dude, you just pulled the emergency stop on my equipment. The guy's like, sir, I'm done talking to you. I just need your ID card. I don't think he thinks I'm a warrant officer. He's just calling me sir to be polite. So I'm like, dude, so I'm like, all right. I pull out my dependent ID card, my brown ID card, and I hand it to the C7. And he's looking at me like a fish out of water. And he's like, I was like, are you going to pull? I was like, who's out? I was like, you better start pulling all these other people and getting on to them too. And it's all these women, which were probably, might have been some military, but probably more likely, probably wise, because he wasn't messing with any of them. But I'm like, dude, what? And he's like, oh, I thought you were in the military. And I was like, and I thought you were a jackass because you just walked up and pulled the emergency stop on my treadmill or my elliptical. So I was like, I'm not even in the military anymore. This stuff still happens. Like the dumb stuff just didn't quit.
When did you realize you want to go work? Well, not realize, but how did you get that job with customs?
So for some reason, I still had it in me that I wanted to go out and save the world, save people. So, I knew customs dealt with drugs and human trafficking. So I applied, passed the polygraph, went down there and started doing that.
And you were flying there, right?
I did air stuff, marine stuff, and ground investigations. I was mixed into a whole lot of stuff. It was good stuff. I liked it.
How long did you do it for?
Just a few years.
Was there any big differences from the Army in customs, because these are two huge government organizations? I know there's a lot of bureaucracy, a lot of red tape. Were there any big differences, or were you just like, this is like a lot like the Army, I don't think I want to do this for long?
It was a lot like the Army. It seemed like a lot of guys from the military would come over to customs. There's some interesting, funny stories. I don't want to get into any of the politics or anything like that, but it was one of the things that drove a lot of people out of there is that in the military, your commands would come in about every 12 to 18 months and they'd rotate out. So you knew, oh, this commander sucks. I just got to ride this out. There'll be another one, right? Well, at customs, you could have the same boss for the next 10 years if they decide to, hey, I'm good here. So, I didn't feel like dealing with that. So I'm like, you know what? I'm going to do something totally different this time. So I talked to Joey and I'm like, how would you feel if we chased the airline dream? And she's like, you're a helicopter pilot. And I'm like, yeah, but there's so before the stuff that is now out there for guys to transition from helicopter to airlines, there used to be this webpage called APTAP, Army helicopter pilot to airline pilot. And there was stuff on there about how to do it. So I started following that path to transition to becoming an airline pilot. So now, about the same time, maybe a little bit before the big push for the Army guys to go to the rotary RTP stuff, I was already kind of doing that. and I was basically I was on the leading edge of that big transition from being a helicopter guy to flying jets.
What was your biggest takeaway from being in customs and your most memorable moment there?
Probably my most memorable moment is, we rescued a bunch of kids that had been human trafficked across the border to be sold into whatever. They might have been sold to be smuggled back across the lines. They might have gone to or gone to sex trafficking. I don't know, but we rescued uh, like 18 kids, and it was a good feeling uh, to know that those 18 kids were going to be safe. It did suck that, almost like the military, the average person didn't understand why things happened. Like, most people, they think a DNA test comes back after a commercial break, and it actually takes a lot longer than that. So, people would be like, why do you separate families? And I'm like, well, because we don't know if that kid actually belongs to those people or not. They could have kidnapped him and just used it to smuggle across or whatever. So, it was always a struggle dealing with the people who didn't understand, especially Congress people would come down there and they, try to tell you how to do your job. But
So essentially, you didn't want to deal with that high visibility, high pressure, and all that. All those.
no, and honestly, because of some of the stuff you've seen in the media and the way customs has been portrayed on a few things, like the guys on the horseback who could have been whipping, that reporters like, oh, they could have been whipping somebody with their reins. Those guys all got investigated for stuff that they didn't do. And, I don't know if you want to call it, I seen the writing on the wall, but, I had seen what happened in the military. It was still part of the government. So with a heavy heart, and I was like, I'm going to do something for myself. And it was really odd feeling to do something that didn't affect anybody else. So like when I became a pilot in the military, it benefited the military. So now that I was going to the airlines, this didn't benefit anybody except me. So it was a very weird feeling to go do that.
What was your biggest takeaway from being in customs for a few years?
That everybody likes to talk about the border, but nobody really knows anything about the border.
It sounds like a common problem in America, right? Everybody talks about shit they don't know about.
They do. Everybody loves to be a keyboard warrior and tell you what the problems are, but they don't know how to fix them.
I'm telling you, man, that's gonna be my saying for this year. It's not your problem until it's your problem, and everybody's an expert on shit they don't know nothing about, man.
It is,
Unbelievable.
yeah.
It's unbelievable, man. So you get it, you apply for this program to become an airline pilot. How long?
No, I didn't apply. I didn't apply for any program. I did this all on my own.
Oh shit, for real?
I built this all on my own to get there. So they got programs now that you can apply to that'll help you build your time. I did this stuff all on my own. I seriously ground this out myself.
If you could just talk me through that whole process, how you did it on your own and how you became an airline pilot for someone else that's trying to do it.
They will take and credit 750 hours of your military time, regardless of what it's in, as long as you have military records showing that you were a pilot and you can show 750 hours. So you just have to build the other hours. At one point, it was 750 hours. I think it's down to like 500 hours or something now. But anyway, when I did it, I had to have 750 fixed wing hours. So I had to go build all those hours myself. So I was renting planes, flying my butt off, going broke doing it to potentially get to the airlines eventually.
So you go through all that, you get your minimums, then you apply to the program or you apply to whatever it is.
Yep, I applied to PSA Airlines, which is a subsidiary of American Airlines, to fly their jets, and I got hired by them. They said, you meet the requirements, come be a pilot. So after that, I went to Dayton, Ohio, went to the training course, and got an ATP and a type rating in CRJ 900s.
What year did this happen?
That was 2018 when I went to Ohio.
And you've been flying for the airline since 2018.
Correct. And then to assuage my guilt of not doing something, I do a lot of off the books mentoring for people. Like, you got these programs out there that charge people, for mentoring. They charge people for airline reviews. They charge, or not airline application reviews. They charge people for resumes. They charge for all kinds of stuff. So I don't charge for anything. Everything I do is completely free. It's the way Dave Draper and all those old time IP guys, even before Dave, trained us in the military. They're like, you know what, you pay it forward. So it doesn't matter whether you're a military guy or you're an all civilian guy, guy or girl. I will help with mentoring as far as where to start, how to start, who to go talk to, what the difference is between the different schools out there. And then because I got a pretty good network of friends and across the spectrum, I can help people if they're wanting to build time. I got a company up in Massachusetts that's always looking for guys to go fly well surveys off the East Coast during the winter, and it's a great time building opportunity. And then if they like you and you do a great job for them during the off season, they got King Airs out in the Pacific that they will send people to King Air school, and then you get type rated at King Air. And this is all before you ever get to the airlines, and you're just building time. There's a few other places, but it's all about helping and grow that next generation of pilots.
How do you like being an airline pilot compared to being a Blackhawk pilot?
There's no comparison. It's it's two different lives. I look back on it sometimes and I'm like, I miss it. I miss the Blackhawk. I miss the crews. I miss the warlords. That was a life. The flying the jet is a job. If that makes sense.
Oh, that makes 100% sense, man. Damn. And you articulated that very well for me to understand the difference. That's powerful. That's very, very powerful. I want to ask you, I know those last two deployments were challenging for you. How did you deal with the changes in yourself, the change Joey saw on you? How did you deal with those changes?
So the way I dealt with the changes is first having to recognize them, having to accept, okay, there's a change. And then that change brings with it some kind of energy, whether it's anger, whether it's the desire to drink or whatever, it brings some kind of energy with it. And what I've told people that have come to me in confidence is, because they'd ask that same question, like, man, I don't know, do I have this demon? And I'm like, you have to find something to match that energy. And then when that energy's there, you focus it over here. If it's drinking, you know what, hit the gym, burn yourself out in the gym for a couple of hours to where you don't want to drink because you need some water. You're exhausted. You know what I'm saying? You got to find that. You got to find that yin to the yang of it. Something where you can take that energy and you can put it to where it's beneficial versus harmful.
What was the happiest moment in your military career?
I don't know if it's the happiest moment, but it's definitely one that I always think back to. So in Iraq, I had Gary Simmons and Matt Cole as roommates. And, between the three of us, we always had something that kept us laughing at each other. And I remember Gary and I came back in from flying, and Matt Cole had eaten a 5-pound bag of Reese's chocolates. And he's in his bed.
I can see Matt doing that, man.
He's in his bed rolling back and forth because his stomach hurts so bad from all that chocolate just right in his gut. And Gary's just like, you are a damn fool. And there's just Reese's wrappers all over the floor.
I love it, man. One thing I love about the Army is those solid relationships we make, man. They're unforgettable.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I sit back and I look at everybody from the warlords, and I'm always trying to think about, man, there was this time, and it was good. You know what I'm saying?
That's what I do too, man. With all the BS and the nonsense I dealt with the Army, I'm now finally at a place where I try to look at the positive side of my experience in the Army and all the relationships and the good people I met. Because I realize that if I just dwell on the bad stuff, that shit'll eat me up.
Damn right it will.
And it ain't gonna do nothing for me.
Yep, that's where you got to redirect that energy somewhere.
What key lessons or takeaways do you hope our listeners would gain from your story?
I hope that, if anything, they take away the fact that, life is short. So build those relationships so that if someone's gone, you keep their memory alive, and hopefully if you're the one that's gone, they keep your memory alive. And, don't make hard harder. Whether you're wrestling with a demon at night, or you're trying to figure out your next career move, don't paralyze yourself to inaction because you don't know what to do. Just sit back and analyze it and figure out what you need to do, whether it's talk to someone or get the help that you need, or, you make that career move that's going to benefit your family.
A lot of selfless actions, man. What is your biggest regret in life or in the military?
That's a good question. In the military, I always look back and say, hey, can I have done more? Wish I'd done more. That's probably the young person talking right there, because, we always want to do more. But as far as, I think we touched on this earlier, but, at the end of the day, we all take two things with us when it's our time to go: memories and regrets. Make memories outweigh the regrets.
Make your memories outweigh your regrets, so you could die with more memories than regrets.
Absolutely. Someone told me that a long time ago, and it makes so much sense, because he's like, we all go with only two things. Doesn't matter how rich, how poor, black, white, male, female. You get those two things with you.
I'm going to challenge you today, man. What legacy do you want to leave behind for your friends and your families?
I hope that I'm remembered as much as I try to remember everybody else. That's the legacy I want to leave. Because if everybody remembers me as much as I try to remember everybody else, then I'd pass something down, if that makes sense.
No, that's dope. That's real good, man. I think a lot of us need to live our life like that, man. What can we do to make the next generation better?
Patience. Patience. The reason I say patience is because we're looking back at 20 plus years, 30 plus years with the hindsight of what we know now. So the younger generation doesn't have that. So we got to have that patience to give them that chance to get there.
What would Irv tell the younger Irv? Or if you had to impart some knowledge on your grandchildren, if you have any, what would you tell them or tell your younger self?
Challenge yourself more. It's amazing what I've accomplished. Challenge myself even more. You know what I'm saying?
You know what's crazy about people like you and I, Irv?
What's that, man?
We've done a lot of shit in our young life, man. And
Yeah.
it's still not enough. That's how I know I have a winner in front of me, right? We've done a lot in our life, and because that's one of mine too. Like, I wish I'd have done more, challenged myself more. And I sit back and I think about the things we've done, and hell, shit we've done, we're truly one percenters, right?
Yeah.
And I'm dead. But that's how you know you have a great human being in front of you, because they never accept enough. They always ask, how much more can I do? I should have done more.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you look at people and you look at all the stuff people have done, and it doesn't matter whether they've done a little bit or a lot. Imagine if they did just a little bit more, push themselves just a little bit harder.
With you still living a high stress job, being an airline pilot, with everything going on in the world right now, with a lot of the things, I'm not even going to say what I want to say, but with a lot of misinformation out there in aviation right now, and a lot of things going on, what do you do to decompress, relax, keep yourself level minded, and keep yourself grounded? What are some things you do? What are your relaxing activities?
Well, if it's just me, I like to get the plane out, do a nice slow pre-flight, and then I'll take off and fly down south someplace and just get back into the basics of something that I love and enjoy, and it's just basic flying. Sometimes I feel like someone's sitting next to me, like maybe God's like got it for a couple minutes, and I just listen to the engine and the wind, and times like that, it just feels like everything's right.
I want to know, how did you end up with a plane and a hangar in your backyard? I have to know that.
So ended up with a plane. Um, my wife Joey said, "Hey, I'd really like to build." We moved to Charlotte, North Carolina, from Myrtle Beach, and she's like, "Hey, I'd really like to be able to get back to the beach and maybe even be able to see some friends and stuff a little more often." And she's like, it sucks driving all day just to get someplace. So I was like, "Well, you like flying? Let's buy an airplane." And she's like, "Oh," she got excited and she's like, "Yes, yes, let's do that." So we bought an airplane, and the next thing I know, we're flying all the way up and down the East Coast. We fly to the Bahamas. During COVID, it was great because they didn't have any restrictions down there, so we'd fly to the Bahamas during COVID. The house with the hangar, I was commuting from Charlotte, North Carolina to Atlanta, and a pilot I was flying with said, "Hey, there's a house for sale in my neighborhood that's got a hangar." And my wife and I were like, "Let's go take a look at it." And then the next thing you know, we put an offer in on it and bought it. So I literally do have an airplane in my backyard.
In a hangar. This guy would take off whenever he feels like it.
And honestly, Joey and I just flew to the beach this weekend, and on our way back, we both looked at each other and we're like, we are some blessed, lucky individuals to be able to do something like that just as a recreation.
The true symbology of freedom that you guys have. You can go anywhere you want to go. Within reason, right? You obviously can't fly to Japan, but within reason, to have that freedom and go wherever you want to go, that's a great feeling.
It's an indescribable feeling. I can't even figure out a good way to describe it. The only thing I can ever tell anybody, it's almost like the first time you get in a car by yourself, you get to the end of the driveway and you're like, I'm driving and I'm leaving and nobody can tell me where to go. I love it.
3 words to describe Irv.
Hopefully memorable. So hopefully people are going to remember me. That's probably a big one right there. What do you got?
I got dependable, self-sacrificing, and patriotic.
Those are 3 good words, and I appreciate that because, man, I tell you what, if people didn't find me dependable, I would definitely feel like a failure.
Damn, Irv, you hit me with some nuggets today, bro. Because honestly, I feel the same way. If there's one thing I want the world to remember is that I am dependable. If you call me, I'm coming. You know I'm coming, and I'll emphatically be there unless it's a true emergency or some reason I can't be there.
Absolutely.
Any lasting words for Ervin Bier?
The only thing I can think of as the lasting word is that you're only alone out there if you want to be alone. There's a lot of friends, a lot of people. Don't forget them.
Well said, Irv. And as always, I want to let you know I truly appreciate your friendship. I appreciate you for taking me in when I got to the Warlords in 2006. You, Gary, Matt, Dennis, Double D, Dwayne Price, all you guys just took me in. Were a little tough on me, but it made me the great aviator I am. And even outside of that, man, you've always been there. I reach out to you. You've always supported me, always helped me out in all my ventures and everything I'm doing. And I want to let you know from friend to friend, I truly appreciate that.
Thank you.
In my eyes, you are very dependable. I know that I could call you up and you got my back and you would help me out as long as you can. And I want to let you know that I truly appreciate that. And I love you for that, man, because finding good people like you nowadays is very hard to find. And to know that I have a lot of guys like you that I could depend on, it says a lot about the person I am and the relationships I've built. And I just want you to know, man, I appreciate it more than you'll ever know how much I appreciate you.
Thanks. I appreciate that. That means a lot.
No problem, man. And thank you, man. I know you're busy. It took us some time. It took us at least 3 to 4 months to get this to happen, but I appreciate you making this happen with as busy you are. And like I said, I am thankful, brother. I appreciate you.
I appreciate you letting me talk. It does. Appreciate it.
You got it, brother. And in closing, stay bold, stay fearless, resilience wins battles, and story shapes legacies. This is Jason Santiago with Heroes Have Wings, my fabulous guest, Ervin Bier, and my close friend. You guys take it easy, and we'll see you the next episode. Thank you for tuning in to Heroes Have Wings, where we honor the extraordinary stories of grit, sacrifice, and resilience. Remember, every hero's journey starts with a single step, so take yours today. If you love this episode, like, subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Until next time, keep pushing limits, breaking barriers, and living your truth. I'm your host, Jason Santiago, and this is Heroes Have Wings, where legends rise.